Present.
Councillor King,
Here.
Councillor Kitts, Councillor Lowe,
Present.
Conseillère Plante,
Hello.
Councillor Tierney,
Present.
Councillor Troster,
Here.
Vice Chair Gower,
Here.
Vice Chair Bradley,
Here.
Chair Leeper,
Here.
Chair Dudas.
Ici.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you very much, Eric. So we have no declarations of interest. We are moving to the 5-year review of the 10-year housing and homelessness plan. We do have a presentation. We have a number of delegations. Before we get started, though, I would like to say a few words. I am honored to introduce the refreshed 10-year housing and homelessness plan. I want to acknowledge the tremendous work our staff and partners have accomplished over the past 5 years, primarily within the Community Social Services Department, but also across all the city organization departments. Le plan d'aujourd'hui s'appuie directement sur ces engagements.
Today's plan is based on that cooperation and innovation.
In 2020, we launched the 10-year plan. We launched the Unsheltered Task Force. We opened physical distancing centers in response to COVID-19, created a community engagement team, and updated the emergency shelter standards as well as the transitional housing standards. The following year, in 2021, we started building on those foundations, releasing the first Housing Services Long-Range Financial Plan, and we increased the city's annual affordable housing investment to $20.6 million. We conducted a community-wide point-in-time count, which changed significantly how we documented homelessness in our community, and we expanded the HIFIS data collection. 2022, we continued scaling that support, funding new housing-based case managers who continued to support an additional 150 clients. We shifted shelter contracts to block funding model, which allows for more predictable funding for shelter providers, ultimately allowing for continued and consistent service delivery to clients. 2023, we continued to expand and planned. We released the Integrated Transition to Housing Strategy, published the 2023-2026 Affordable Housing Capital Strategy. We acquired Kilbourne Place, which is the future community and housing hub. We leased Corkstown Road, providing new spaces for families in transitional housing. 2024, we continued to increase capacity. There was a continued progression of our work and our support for the community. We introduced a newcomer reception model. We acquired St. Joseph Boulevard in my ward. We launched the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table. And I do want to thank all of our partners who sit on that table, which has been absolutely formidable in terms of addressing the need for housing in our community. We created the new Strategic Initiatives Department. We enabled Cornerstone's movement to a new women's shelter facility. 2025 was another formidable year in terms of charting the path forward. We completed the comprehensive housing needs assessment. We operated, sorry, forgive me, I haven't had enough coffee apparently, St. Joseph as well as Queen Street in terms of transitional housing. We signed the agreement with Refugee 613 to co-design newcomer service pathways. And we identified 14 municipal sites for potential affordable housing, approximately 500 units. And we also launched the Integrated Housing Systems Waitlist module. I wanted to give a bit of a lay of the land in terms of where we've been, because we've come a long way. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like it's enough. We need more housing in our city. We need more housing that fits all affordability levels, and we need to make sure we're addressing the needs of our most vulnerable members of our community. But in terms of this term of council, we have built strongly on a foundation that will lead us to a continued progression for the years to come. I wanted to give you a bit of a highlight of that, just to kind of lay the framework. Staff are going to give a presentation, and I know we have a number of amazing delegations who are here with us today online and in person, and I do want to thank them in advance for their time and being here. But I did want to say that we have achieved quite a lot, and I do want to thank my colleagues on this joint committee as well as on council for all the effort they've put into moving the needle forward on this. So enough from me. I did want to introduce staff. We have Clara Freire and Cale Brown, who are going to be delivering the presentation. And following that, we'll continue with our delegations.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair, and thank you to both committees for hearing us today and receiving our 10-year housing and homelessness plan. And thank you, Chair Dudas, for reflecting on the transformational and incredible progress we've made over the last 5 years under the former plan. And we've learned a lot in those 5 years. You'll hear more about that in the presentation from Cale. But I wanted to take a moment just to echo a tremendous appreciation and thank you to our staff and community and social services for their very, very hard work. As you can imagine, it often feels like you're swimming against the current in tackling issues of housing inaffordability and homelessness. And so I thank them for their tenacity, and I thank them for their commitment to bringing this plan forward. And it's an all-of-city approach. So I do want to thank and acknowledge Debbie Stewart, who's here today, and her team, Lily, and others for contributing equally to this plan. Merci de reconnaître nos équipes.
Thank you for recognizing our teams, as well as the work that's been accomplished over the past 5 years. I'd also like to thank our community partners. Thanks to their cooperation and their expertise and their engagement, they have made a real and genuine contribution to moving this plan forward in a significant way.
This plan reflects incredible strength in relationships with community partners, and we could not have brought this forward without them. So as you receive this plan and as we move forward in thinking about implementation, I just want to reflect on the fact and want you to consider that at the municipal level, as you know, we do not have all the levers we need to tackle and address all the problems before us. We need structural change, we need systemic change, we need investment from other levels of government, and we need to leverage the resources we do have, the expertise we do have, the partnerships we do have. That will achieve success nonetheless, and we will continue to use this plan as the guiding document and guiding policy document to not only continue the collaborative work with community partners and within the City of Ottawa, but also use it as the guiding document for our ongoing advocacy to other levels of government and for your advocacy in the tables that you sit around with those levels of government. So thank you for joining us on this journey. Thank you again, Chair Dudas, for the work you do on Community Services Committee and for supporting us all along the way over the last 5 years. So merci, miigwech, and I'll hand it over to Cale now.
Thank you, Clara. We can go to the next slide. So to provide a little bit of context of why do we take on doing a 10-year housing and homelessness plan, it is a requirement from the provincial government under the Housing Services Act that we undertake a 10-year plan and review it every 5 years. In terms of that plan, they do provide some high-level objectives of which we need to include in the plans, a big piece of which was the housing needs assessment requirement, which we completed a few months ago, going from about a 30-page document to a 200-plus page document, which has really grounded our foundation of this 10-year plan, or this iteration of the 10-year plan, in data. The other reason we do 10-year plans, apart from being a good planning tool, is that it is also a requirement of various federal and provincial funding opportunities, be it capital or operating funding. Next slide, please. So as we'd heard a little bit about, we have had an immense amount of progress over the last 5 years. Despite there still being problems in the community, we have made major achievements over this term. Under the Everyone Has a Home priority, we have preserved over 25,000 affordable housing units, which includes rent geared to income, below market rent, and regular affordable units. This has been an exceptional achievement despite ongoing issues with making sure that aging infrastructure is maintained so that we can keep our affordability levels across our community housing portfolio at sustainable levels. The other thing we've really overachieved on actually is around the number of supportive housing units we've done. We've almost done 1,000 units over the last 5 years of new affordable housing development, 329 of which were supportive, actually surpassing our goal of 50 units a year during the term of the plan. So that's an exceptional accomplishment and really goes to show that we were able to pivot towards some of those emerging needs in the community. We also created 3,279 affordable housing benefits. So this is things like the Canada-Ontario Housing Benefit. And with that, we've really been able to provide additional affordability mechanisms in the community where we're not able to build ourselves out of it or have access to those existing affordable housing units. This was also a record over the period of 5 years in terms of the new benefits created, supporting so many in our community to have a flexible and portable benefit. In goal 2, we really focused on, as we'd mentioned, expanding our transitional housing capacity. In addition to hearing all of those sites that we have purchased or leased as a city, we've also transformed how we deliver services in our shelter system away from being an emergency shelter focused model to a transitional housing focused model, which provides additional supports and capacity for people as they move along their journey to long-term housing. This capacity also allowed us to have, for the first time ever in 2025, a winter plan where we had ongoing sufficient bed capacity within the shelter system. And it was an exceptional accomplishment working closely with the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table to do public education and make sure that folks were aware of how they can access beds within the system. We also built out a 24/7 outreach model. At 2020, when we had started the plan, we saw about on average of 50 people throughout the whole summer that were experiencing unsheltered homelessness. That number is up to 550 in 2025. To respond to this, we've created a 24/7 outreach service model, which used to only be activated in extreme cold or heat. This model now runs 24/7, and we also are providing additional services as alternatives to shelter, such as 24-hour drop-in programs. This service model will be further enhanced as we roll out our updated unsheltered response model, which was presented to Community Service Committee in February. And the last thing, which was an important update that we had throughout our system over the last 5 years, was really creating that newcomer reception model to deal with the unique needs of individuals who are newcomers to the community in terms of their settlement journey, which supports access into long-term housing. And we work closely with many community partners in the settlement sector to build this out and making sure that we have that additional service pathway and wraparound support to support newcomers to the community. This also looked at new partnerships like groups like Matthew House, Carty House, Stepstone House that run innovative shelter models across the community, which are cost effective, and also scattered sites, which is a new way of doing transitional housing across the community. In the last goal, we worked together. A huge accomplishment was bringing forward an updated long-range financial plan, which will be completed again during the next term of council, really updating the plans that we have in front of you today and costing out the new model. We also supported the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition to launch their Indigenous Housing and Homelessness Strategy. This was a very exciting milestone, many years in the development, and they have already successfully kicked off one of the first projects noted in that plan, which was the Inuit VAW shelter. Next slide, please. So in terms of the journey that we've been on over the last year and a half to create this updated 10-year plan before you, the first part, as I mentioned, was really around collecting that needed data. So in addition to that housing needs assessment, the point in time counts, we also gathered a lot of learnings from consultations from across our city partners, whether it be strategic initiatives and other groups in the city, such as the official plan, that also had lots to say about how we do affordable housing and the support vulnerable residents in our community. We did extensive amount of engagement sessions, both for the general public, with sector partners, and including those with our lived expert team through the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table, but also in the community with various groups that we partner with as a city to ensure that we're understanding what's happening on the ground and making sure that it's relevant to the reality of the experiences people are going through in the housing and homelessness world. What we've been up to over the last couple of months is really related to actually developing the strategy. So this has been a hand-in-hand exercise working to co-develop with the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table, the updated Housing and Homelessness Plan. As you'll hear about in a minute, this has really been the cornerstone and the change of this 10-year plan compared to our last one. We're moving away from that City of Ottawa delivered approach to a Community of Ottawa approach to the plan. So following actually the approval from Council and Committee today, we will be working with the community to actually implement that community-driven approach to delivering on the plan over the next 5 years. Next slide, please. The scope of the 10-year housing and homelessness plan goes from unsheltered homelessness up to affordable rental housing, but everything noted in this diagram is also a responsibility of the municipality. The reason the Housing and Homelessness Plan focuses on those with the most acute needs in our community is the funding for capital and operating that we use to achieve the goals in the plan are really focused around that end of the housing spectrum. There are also things for market rental housing, affordable home ownership that are done through things like the official plan, inclusionary zoning policies, and we work internally as city departments to align our efforts on both the 10-year plan and other city strategies that link into the 10-year housing and homelessness plan. Next slide, please. So as I'd mentioned, the big change in this 10-year plan before you is that we took a co-designed approach working with our sector experts across the community in both housing and I'll call it housing adjacent community partners such as the health sector. We've moved away from having a very long, really prescriptive 10-year housing and homelessness plan because we saw changes in the community over the last 5 years that could not have been predicted, and we wanted to make sure that our next 10-year plan or this iteration was nimble to move with changing funding opportunities and opportunities as it relates to pressures in our community. The updated plan structure, we've gone from about a 150-page document to a 30-page document, and this is going to be supplemented by annual work plans that are completed again, co-developed with that Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table. The annual work plan approach will allow us to pivot to those emerging funding opportunities and pressures within our community, minimizing any risk that our plan, as we presented today, cannot respond to new pressures. We've also significantly made a step forward over the last 5 years to measuring how we track our data within the housing and homelessness sector, and we plan to continue that approach with the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table, again, bringing in partners that are not necessarily directly housing, but housing adjacent that are important to someone's housing journey, such as the health sector. Next slide, please. So one of the big things that the community we needed to add throughout this 10-year plan was really concrete vision and guiding principles, which will help guide us through the implementation of those annual work plans, but also ensured that we grounded all of our 10-year housing and homelessness plan. The glossy report that was attached to the report is settled in these visions. So a big piece of this is making sure that we're going through considering our equity inclusion, focused and coordinated, ensuring that we're people-centered, protective and resilient, and that we're accountable. And the reason for these guiding principles is, as you'll note in the updated 10-year plan, we do not note specific targets and outcomes. Those will be contained in the annual work plan, but we wanted to set a vision and guiding principles that will ensure those annual work plans adhere to our vision and principles that we've established as a community. Next slide, please. The 3 priorities that we had in the plan since 2014 continue to be there. So it's that everyone has a home, people get the support we need, and that we work together. And again, these statements are likely things we're going to be working on for many years to come. And as you've seen, lots of accomplishments working under these goals to date. Next slide, please. So I'll take you through a brief overview of what is in the updated 10-year housing and homelessness plan. Under the first priority, we've really worked to have 3 sub-priorities, the first of which is preserving the existing community housing stock. So that's working to use our capital repair funding to preserve those 25,000 units in the community that include rent geared income, affordable housing, and below market rent units. We really want to be working with the housing and homeless sector here to ensure that we're being innovative of how we approach this. And a big part of our update to the long-range financial plan in the next term of council will include specific elements for our capital repair strategy. In goal 1.2, we look at increasing the supply of community housing. So this will be an increase of supply through community housing, through new builds, acquisitions, and working with community partners to build out those affordability levels broadly in the community. And the last one is increasing access to housing affordability. This is around our housing benefits and providing access where we can't build or maintain enough stock to support the vulnerable in our community, that we can also offer portable benefits to either directly to landlords that are private or nonprofit. Next slide, please. The next priority is really around ensuring people get the supports we need. And this is something that's been a big change in our community. We've seen an increase in mental health illness, a toxic drug supply, which is really adding pressure on this priority and how we approach things as a community to ensure that we aren't just providing a roof over your head, but the wraparound supports that make you sustainable in that housing. The first goal of which in here is presenting housing loss, and this is something you'll hear all the time from myself and the sector moving forward, is that we as a city need to be working upstream. That means doing more cost-effective interventions, keeping people in the housing they have, working towards rapid rehousing where we can, and ensuring that people are in their housing are well supported as their needs change throughout the age. The goal 2.2 is really around if somebody does enter homelessness, that those occurrences are brief and non-recurring. That involves ensuring that we have the proper wraparound supports when someone enters shelter or transitional housing system to rapidly house them and get them back into that long-term housing. A big piece of which, and a focus for this version of the 10-year plan, is around enhancing our supportive housing system. That will involve scaling up our supportive housing, but also make sure we have the support services on site from an operating perspective that can deal with the complex needs we're increasingly seeing in the community. Next slide, please. Goal 3 is around two different things. The first is that we create a system where we're integrated. So a huge piece of this has been, thank you to the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table, that we have a framework to actually do this in our community, to work with not only the housing and homelessness sector, but also those very important sector adjacent groups, older adult plans, some of the things we do around health and housing, and I'll get into it a little bit more at the end of the presentation. The next goal is around strengthening our housing and homelessness system through existing partnerships, research, and innovation. One of the big things we want to see is show that Ottawa is a leader in a lot of what we do as a community. You've heard some of the amazing successes that we've had. So what this goal is around focusing on working with our research partners, universities, colleges to actually evaluate the work we do, make data-informed tweaks to our system, and ensure that as we set goals and targets for the community, that we're using a data-led approach to do so. Next slide, please. So as I'd mentioned, the annual work plan development is where we're going to be taking what you see in this high-level 10-year plan framework and boiling it down into individual actions and targets that we can set as a community. And again, the strength of that will be able to pivot those on a year-to-year basis with the opportunities and pressures that we're seeing. We also, in addition to that, are going to be working very closely with the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table to present our annual progress reports as a part of this plan. Next slide, please. So I wanted to highlight a couple of initiatives that are currently underway. This is likely going to form some of the basis of the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table's work plan as we start to embark on this next journey. The first initiative that I think is key, you've heard a number of times, is integrating health and housing. So this work will really be, now that we have a 10-year plan, setting up our health and housing plan, which will go along with this to really call out those specific health needs that we have across that housing spectrum, from unsheltered homelessness up until affordable rental housing. And what health services do we need to embed from an operating perspective in our housing to make sure that tenancies are successful, people stay in their housing, and they're supported with the proper health supports to get into long-term housing. The next one is really around ending youth homelessness, and this will be working certainly with the Mayor's Office on our commitment as a city to end youth homelessness by 2030. A big piece of this will be again delivered at the community. Our youth sector partners will be leading the table, focused on diversion and upstream interventions. So again, this focuses on that important need that we've outlined in the plan to work in diversion as prevention as a key priority, as an effective, cost-effective intervention. We're also looking to do diversion and prevention more broadly, continuing to build on the success of a recent pilot project with the Alliance to End Homelessness and Shepherd's Good Hope, which saw some pretty exceptional diversion rates from shelter as we become more intentional in our approach to doing diversion. We're also looking to coordinate and enhance our outreach services. As I'd mentioned, we have really enhanced the level of service that we have in terms of a 24/7 response, but it will also be building out that response so that we're taking into account the needs of the community and businesses that may be impacted by some of the social disorder that we're seeing. The next one is supportive housing. So as the city is aware, we were part of an audit last year, and now we're working to actually go through and update our system based on those audit requirements. Key initiatives under this will include the Bumblebee project, where we're looking to expand and scale supportive housing across the community. We have amazing opportunities like the Kilbourne site, which will be developed with a supportive housing component. And then we're also looking to create a set of standards that ensures the community, as well as our community partners, are all clear on what the delivery pathways are to service for supportive housing. Next slide, please. The next one is Ottawa's family homelessness system. So as committee and council is aware, we have worked to deliver on our integrated transition to housing strategy, which was a big update to how we do our single shelter system. We are bringing an update to Community Services Committee at the end of April to update our family homelessness strategy. And this will really be launched with the exciting opening of our 377 O'Connor site as we move away from those emergency overflow hotel models. Also, this is a very recent announcement, but we have received notification that the City of Ottawa will be taking on the role to allocate veterans housing programming. So this is $975,000 over the next 3 years to deal specifically with veterans homelessness. And the city is really excited as this being an opportunity to effectively get to functional zero for veterans homelessness in our community. The newcomer reception system is again continuing to be under development. We now have an amazing set of sites that are dedicated to supporting newcomers. And really what work will be over the coming years is to make sure that we have an established pathway, regardless of where you end up in the housing or homelessness system, to get into that newcomer reception system, to get the proper wraparound supports for long-term housing. And then the last one I wanted to mention was the Indigenous Housing and Homelessness Plan. There are several initiatives that will be supporting our Indigenous community partners to work through as part of that plan, a key one of which will be tying in the Aging Out initiative, which is focused on Indigenous youth aging out of care. So a number of important initiatives will be coming up over the next 5 years for that. Next slide, please. So I won't go into great detail in terms of risk mitigation, but wanted to point out that thanks to the leadership of the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table, we have set up this plan and framework in a way that I think is going to support us really well over the next 5 years. We have the governance table to be able to lead this work, and we're also going to be able to, through these annual work plans, be more nimble to respond to community needs and ensure that the implementation is relevant to what those opportunities and concerns are. We're also going to have the opportunity from a funding perspective during the next term of council to update the long-range financial plan, which will really put the dollars to what is in the plan here, which will be guided by the targets set out in those annual work plans. Next slide, please. So just in conclusion, the big part of the work is getting this plan co-developed that we can all agree on the objectives, which we are very happily at that with the community and the partners we work with. The next step is really going to be for us to go away as the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table, co-develop those annual plans, work on progress reports, but also embed the work that we do within the entire housing and homelessness system. So taking it from the city's plan that we're presenting to council today to make sure that this is embedded throughout our sector into their strategic plans at the agency level. And with that, I'd just like to, once again, to Claire's point, this is not a community and social services plan exclusively. In addition to what I mentioned with the Housing Homelessness Leadership Table and the community, this has been extensively supported by departments around the city. And over the last 5 years, we've really grown strong partnerships across city departments that have really supported refining and delivering this, and also permeating the objectives of our 10-year housing and homelessness plan into those other adjacent plans across different departments. So a big thank you to them as well.
Thank you very much, Kale, for that presentation. We are going to move to delegations, and we'll be starting with Katie Brookholder Harris from the Ottawa Alliance to End Homelessness. You have your choice. There's many. Thank you so much, Katie, for being here. You know the 5 minutes. Start whenever you're ready.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me this morning. As the co-chair of the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table, as Kale mentioned, I'm pleased to share our collective support for the 10-year plan. This plan is stronger because it hasn't just been shaped by legislative requirements, but by community stakeholders in partnership with the city. People with lived and living experience of homelessness, frontline providers, Indigenous partners, healthcare agencies, advocates, housing providers. The process for developing this plan was done in partnership with the table, with an emphasis that consultation is not enough. There's been an evolution in our relationship with the city, and I can't tell you how positive that has been. There's an emphasis on co-design and how we need to move forward together to tackle the housing and homelessness crisis in Ottawa. The plan is so high level at this stage that it can be hard to see ourselves in it. The next steps moving forward will be to put the nuts and bolts in place with the work plan. However, it's also high level because ending homelessness requires real-time data that allows us to be nimble and pivot in our approach as needed. As change happens, data and evidence need to guide our collective response. The core tenets of the plan, everyone has a home, people get the support they need, and we work together, don't change, even as economic and social circumstances will. These are the guiding outcomes that we need to constantly refer back to as we work towards system change. The plan calls for community housing system transformation, a bold goal, but we're already doing it with initiatives like the Bumblebee Project for Supportive Housing. The plan calls for ending unsheltered homelessness, a return to housing first fidelity like CMHA's recent initiative funded by the city in successfully housing and supporting unsheltered people with some of the most complex needs. It's evidence that when we make real, nimble, evidence-based approaches, we can end homelessness. Whole system approaches like bolstering diversion, as Kale mentioned, can have the biggest impact on getting people the support they need. The realities of homelessness and housing precarity are vastly different for racialized communities, Indigenous people, people with disabilities, 2S LGBTQ+, and other marginalized groups. The solutions are vastly different as well. As the plan moves forward, lived expertise is absolutely critical to its success. People know what they need. Listening to that is the part where we all have a lot to learn. It's also abundantly clear that housing alone is not enough. We can't solve homelessness without long-term, sustained supports that help people remain housed. Mental health services, substance use supports, income stability, culturally appropriate care, these are not secondary considerations. They are essential infrastructure. Too often, people cycle through systems because we provide short-term solutions to long-term challenges. This plan rightly acknowledges that stabilization requires ongoing investment in supports, not just units, and that investment needs to be predictable, flexible, and sustained over time. The city is responsible and accountable for this plan, and so is the community. Working together differently was the foundation of this iteration of the plan, and it's required for its implementation. The city cannot hold the outcomes of this plan alone. It funds a portion of the sector, and the ecosystem of services required to end homelessness is much bigger and more complex. We know we need other levels of government to step up in serious ways. We know we need real lasting funding. We know we need other levels of government to lead with evidence and compassion rather than political grandstanding. And the vector between what the plan names and what is needed is actually where community advocacy comes in. We recognize that city staff are not in a position to advocate to other levels of government, but community partners are, and we can be feisty about it. We're not naive. We know that the current economic, political, and social climate is working against us. This is why it's more critical than ever to drive forward with tenacity and vision. This is not aspirational language. It's grounded in evidence. Communities across North America have demonstrated that when you align housing supports and coordinated systems, you can drive homelessness down significantly. The plan has big goals, and it should. The mayor's recent commitment to ending youth homelessness is a big goal and one that we can achieve. We can end unsheltered homelessness in 5 years. We can reduce family homelessness significantly. We can create flow in our system so that people don't get stuck. We can scale non-market housing, and we can move further upstream with the wide array of community supports that prevent housing loss in the first place. We have the evidence, the expertise, and most importantly, we have the compassion and collective will to make it rare, brief, and non-recurring.
Thank you very much. You have a question from Councillor Troston.
Hi, Katie. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your partnership in creating this plan. I couldn't help but notice that the way the deliverables are set out are a little bit different. You know, there's goals to increase some things and decrease other things. There was a very lofty goal with chronic homelessness in the previous plan, which I don't think we came close to meeting. I mean, it was to end chronic homelessness in 10 years. I'm concerned that we're kind of losing the chronic piece in this iteration of the study, or this iteration of the plan, and it's something I'm, of course, quite obsessed with because of the crisis of unsheltered homelessness in the downtown core. So I'm just interested in your assessment of where we go forward on the chronic piece, and what you think we need to do to address the concerns laid out in the Auditor General's report on supportive housing, namely the fact that the people in the worst shape are not getting housed. And so what I hear repeatedly is, well, it's because we're not getting the funding we need from the province. But I'm also at the point where I'm like, what can we do as a city, and invite the province to come to the table? But even if they don't, how do we make a very concrete dent in a very visible, very upsetting form of homelessness in the downtown core?
I love this question. Thank you for letting me get to talk about it. So first of all, I think the goal of ending chronic homelessness is important, and we've gone about it the wrong way. What we've done is design a system that literally creates a need to escalate risk and become chronically homeless before you can get the resources you need. So we're flipping it. And I think the work that the city's funded on diversion, bolstering that, making that more effective than I think it has been in the past, is a part of that. The plan is the what. The strategy is not the plan. The strategy is how we go about it. And I think that's the next piece of work, and it's going to be reflected in the work plan. I think for folks who are most complex, we need to draw down the inflow into the system. We need to take the pressure off of shelters being over capacity, that they actually can't or have any resources to help people. We need to get real creative and real nimble when it comes to, okay, maybe we have a subsidy. That subsidy goes to somebody already in supportive housing who wants to move, and then we're able to move somebody who has more complex needs into supportive housing. We need to start thinking of our resources as a collective bucket of resources. I really believe, and I think the CMHA project I spoke to, and I know that there's been an application for more funding for that with the city in partnership, is a really good indicator. I'll be very honest, we've moved away from housing first as best practice. We all say it, and it's something that we don't have fidelity to that model, and I think we've been losing that. I think that's showing too with this small pilot. They were working with the most complex folks who were unsheltered, who are part of, you know, people who are on the street, who don't have housing, who are using and really struggling with mental health challenges and healthcare challenges. And those folks are housed. They had intensive wraparound supports. They focused on getting them obviously a rent subsidy. Most of them are housed in the private market, which again is something that is evidence-based housing first original model, but I think we've stopped believing that that's possible. And so I think that scaling that kind of approach is key. Yes, funding, not going to question that. We definitely need more funding, but we also need to scale strategically. Where are we putting the investment? How are we putting that investment so that it can have the biggest impact? Regarding the supportive housing audit, I mean, we're just sort of scratching the surface and starting to talk about at the HHLT, but I think a really key piece of all this is going to be real clarity on definitions as a community. We're all talking about different things when we say some of these buzzwords. And when we get a very clear framework of what do we mean by supportive housing, what's the spectrum of supportive housing, what do we mean by transitional housing, what do we mean by emergency shelter, clarity on that front is going to help us move forward and drive strategically to where investments need to go.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I would also be really interested to know if through our data collection, we can really identify the relatively small number of people who are absolutely in the worst shape and need priority. They may not be on any list right now. But as I keep saying, if that man who's screaming on the street and causing dozens of police calls a day, scaring people walking down the street because his needs are so unmet, if that guy is housed, it has an immediate positive knock-on effect on the rest of the community. So thank you very much. One other question. I know that the Alliance's preference is for permanent housing, and we have been expanding this transitional model, which is better than the traditional shelter system. But I'll tell you, I was entirely supportive of the acquisition of the hotel in O'Connor, but very leery about the fact that we're putting families into another transitional situation, even though it'll be one that's much better than where many of them are now. What do you think? And again, this is the vision. We're going to be moving into strategy, but what would you like to see the city do to have us move more into that housing first model and to move away from expanding shelter?
So to be very clear, I'm going to put on the Alliance hat right now, not the HHLT hat, and these are really important strategic conversations that need to be guided by that table. The Alliance hat, to your point, we very much appreciate what a financial bind the city is in, and the family numbers, 1,400 children in shelter, over 600 families every month. Like, that is wild. Most people don't know that. Most people don't believe that when they hear. I know councillors get those numbers regularly. I agree, the Alliance agrees that more transitional housing isn't where we want to go. And at the same time, I appreciate the incredible fiscal pressure. And moving out of the hotels, important, better. But I think we have to keep shooting for best. And what that means is more investment in permanent options. I think that right now, part of this is actually definitions. And, when we talk about the zoning components, when we talk about how we define different things, are we considering transitional housing, or are we considering that something different like a shelter, because it is still temporary? And I think there's a real paradigm shift that as a community, we need to go through in order to really understand each of these pieces has a place. And I think there's also like an emergency mode where they have a place, and that is right now in the current context. But we have to look towards what are our steps to get to a system that still has emergency shelters. What do those look like? Let's hope they're not congregate settings in 5 to 10 years. What does transitional housing look like? Maybe that could be the new shelter. More dignified, a lock and a key. We see that in other communities. And then looking at every dollar we spend for new units, we try and get that towards permanent options. Again, Alliance hat, these are big, crunchy conversations that need to happen as a whole community. And I want to also say, I think the value of the HHLT is that we can have those conversations and work to partner with the city on driving forward stuff that's not going to be popular, but maybe the best and necessary thing.
Thank you. Okay, one more thing. So, there was certainly some discord in the community this summer around the winter plan. And around the fact that we had moved to a transitional model, which is ultimately positive. We got people out of community centers, great thing. But there was a frustration of not enough places where people could just sort of walk in, and this real tension from frontline workers in the community. And of course, the frustration is I had to tell people, what you're asking for is another shelter. We're not building more emergency shelters downtown. But there will always be a portion of people who will not be happy with any of the options that are currently available in the system. They have multiple levels of trauma. They might have a pet. They might have a partner. All sorts of reasons why a traditional shelter wouldn't work for them. What is the solution for those folks from your perspective? And how do you think this plan addresses it?
So I just want to say I give a huge props to the conversations we've been having about this at the HHLT, because there's policy and what we think is happening, and then there's what actually happens on the ground. And what's been so incredibly valuable has been the lived experts at the table who are like, this is not what's happening, and my peers are seeing different things, and I'm seeing different things. And that has driven a really honest and important conversation. And I think the city, just the level of community partners and city partners being accountable to each other and to people who are on the street navigating this, I've just seen an increase in that and an increase in trust in a very big way. I think that we need more low barrier spots for next year, but I think we've already seen with the SHEPS pivot, we can pivot. It doesn't necessarily mean opening up another shelter. I also think you need community partners to advocate for let's not open up more shelter. And I get that that's a very hard thing to do, but I think that's some communication that needs to happen, and we are there with you. That is very much an alignment, I think, across the partners at the table. So moving forward, there's already work happening on doing surveys with people on the street, trying to figure out what does summer cooling look like, what does winter warming look like. And I think next year we know there has got to be a ton of flexibility baked into how we do this. And I think it's probably not going to look like more shelter beds, but people who may need, I just need 2 hours of warmth so I can survive the night, but I'm not going to stay in a shelter bed. And I think that was the distinction that people with lived experience really clarified, is that a bed isn't the same as just because there's available beds doesn't mean that it's actually still a place folks will go to. So what are those alternative models?
Okay, thank you very much. So you're suggesting we can work with existing partners to pivot during the winter months, like Shepherds of Good Hope is able to do. Okay, I appreciate that very much. And yeah, that was the tension that I kept experiencing, because I had frontline advocates advocating to me every time I was in the community, saying what's happening on the ground is not necessarily what the city says should be happening. And so I think we really need to course correct before next winter. But I agree with you, the answer isn't more shelters. We need more homes. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Chair Leeper.
Thank you very much, Chair. Katie, thank you very much for the presentation. Always a pleasure to see you, obviously. At a fairly high level, this 5-year refresh shortens the document, less focus on concrete actions, a lot more focus on the principles and some of the high-level goals. So we're kind of being asked to take a flyer on approving a plan that is less concrete and less action driven. What can you tell us about what that first year action plan will look like? If we pass this, do we have some commitment to make sure that that first year work plan does focus on concrete actions that will meaningfully address some of the issues we're facing?
Yeah, and I think you can trust it because it's already happening. Like, I think a lot of it is lean into things we're doing now, scale strategically. And as we develop that work plan, that looking ahead, I've got to say, like the data gathering on really strategic data questions, there is real-time data with HIFIS. There's great work happening there, but we need more information to truly understand the lay of the land. That's going to help drive more decisions. But I do think things like bumblebee, diversion work, unsheltered homelessness, like those things are happening, winter warming, winter planning. And I think it's ensuring that it fits into the strategy. And so I would say have confidence because it's already happening. We're not waiting to do things. And to be very honest, the former work plan iteration was exhausting. Having spent a fair amount of time with that document, you couldn't find yourself in it. Like, it was very difficult. And I can only imagine the pressure that must have put on city staff, to be honest. I think this allows for a much more nimble response with, here's the goal. How are we going to get to the goal? Oh my gosh, we've been knocked off course. Well, now we need to still figure out how to get to the goal. And I think that's going to be far more effective and nimble. And to be honest, like, builds momentum for the people who have to implement it than sort of having that, here's the 80,000 task list we have to do.
The nimbleness struck me as being particularly important, but can you give me some idea or give us some idea from the time we passed that 10-year housing and homelessness plan, how relevant or irrelevant is it 5 years later? It strikes me that there was a lot of change that rendered some of that plan less relevant today than it was, which reinforces your point with respect to the need for nimbleness.
Yeah, so frankly, I think 10-year plans are ridiculous, but they're required by the province, and 5-year plans are a much more realistic timelines. And if you're really being realistic, it should align with terms of council because politics has a lot to play. But I think ultimately that's why we do 5-year refreshes, knowing that so much is going to change. And I think the structure of how this one has been designed still gives us that here are the big picture outcomes. But to Councillor Troster's point about chronic homelessness, we've gone about it the opposite way. So the goal may still be the same, but we need to go about it a different way. And I think things like this allow us to make that pivot.
Okay. With respect to supportive housing and trying to ensure that that is successful, what is the specific advocacy that you consider city councillors and sector leaders can do with the province?
We really need money for operational support. Like I think Build Canada Homes, I mean, there's money, which is great. How much money is another question, but I think that Ottawa's a leader. The Bumblebee Project and leveraging collective equity to get more supportive units is really strategic and very exciting to see. And I think it's that operational funding. All of community partners say that over and over again. That's the piece we can't sustain. And I know there's partners who are like, look, I can't sign on to do another building unless I actually have a guarantee of funding because it just puts people in the fiscal hole.
Amazing. Katie, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much, Katie. Thank you for your delegation. I just have two quick questions, really. I enjoyed hearing you speak, and you talked about ways that we can prevent homelessness. You specifically spoke about some ideas in terms of moving people, rotating them through supportive housing. I'll just say it like it is. Talked about the diversion work that's going on. One of the biggest challenges that I experience as a councillor are situations where the delta between the RGI and the new affordable housing is contributing to more homelessness. And a couple examples that we see: people that are living in a rent geared to income, they obtain employment that takes them to an AMR level of rate. So they're going from paying a couple $100s for housing under the RGI model to paying average market rent, which for right now is $1,500, and you see the default rates. And so what is happening is that there's not a lot of, it's almost as if there's no incentive for people to get out of the situation they are. And the default rates when people move out of that are extreme. And so there are no housing benefits available. So what is the solution there? And I said two examples, but the other one is people that are renting market rate housing and their circumstances change, whether it's through disability, somebody can no longer work. I've seen cases where it's a disabled child, and we basically have to tell them that they have to wait to be evicted and get into a shelter in order to secure an RGI unit. Like, how can we advocate for housing benefits for those populations where we are actually encouraging people to fall into homelessness so that they can, what is the answer?
Yeah, I mean, you've pointed to exactly, the system has been designed that way on purpose. Like, let's be honest, systems are designed by people, and we have a system that typically polices people for being poor. I mean, I think some of those legislative hoops provincially of, you get a job and then you get your money clawed back after, I think like $200 is exactly the kind of problem that makes it so difficult for people to get ahead. I think stabilizing people up front, the housing loss prevention work that happens at day programs, community health centers, all of those different partners, really, really critical for people who do move into the private market. And frankly, for both family homelessness, I know unit size is the big challenge in many ways, but for certain types of homelessness, put the rent subsidy towards them because it'll stop them from becoming homeless and that trajectory getting much worse. We need more flexible rent subs. I think the city's figured that out by creating their own rent subs, but I also know we're looking at a provincial and federal government who are not making renewed commitments at this time. We anticipate that will come, but at the same time, we don't know. So In general, I think a basic housing benefit, a Canadian housing benefit's required, and that is not on the city. But I would deeply encourage you to advocate like nobody's business, because that piece can stabilize housing really significantly. And I think diversion's really interesting, and the data coming out of a lot of communities is that there is a one-time short, flexible cost sometimes. Like it might be arrears. Sometimes it's like, I can live with so-and-so, but I need money for groceries. Like it's really simple stuff. And there's kind of very random stories about how diversion can work. And the amount of money to keep someone in their housing is often less than it may seem. It's not always an ongoing rent step. And so I think the more we explore that, the more we use the data to drive those approaches, the better off we'll be. And to your point, just around the structure of, you get AMR and then all of a sudden you have no money left over at all, like just so little. I think it's important we distinguish that ending homelessness is not ending poverty, but ending homelessness and getting people stabilized to pay 30% of their budget to be on housing costs is getting a lot closer to ending poverty. And so I think in that sense, how we stabilize people's rent or housing costs in general is really, really key. And as much as it seems like upfront it's a lot of money, the subsidy is going to be better for us in the long run than somebody falling into that system.
Thanks very much. Again, I know you mentioned it in the context of supportive housing about needing the operating dollars. It's the same thing in these circumstances. We need to have that operational funding from upper levels of government, and that's where the commitment needs to be. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll just add, like, the city covers 50% of costs for homelessness, right? The other two much more well-resourced levels of government are covering the remaining 50%. And that's where councillors can fight, and that's where community advocates need to be fighting as well.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Councillor Carr. Conseillère Plante.
Yes, hi, Kate. Thank you so much for being here. And we tried to tackle the definition issue in our zoning bylaw review, and it kind of just didn't really go anywhere fast. But I hear all the time, and I want to pull my hair out when people are like, oh, I donated to the mission because I support housing. Or they'll say like the women's shelter, Cornerstone or whatever. But that's actually, because they can stay there most of the day, that's actually more like transitional housing than it is. So I was just wondering, what is the solution here? People aren't even using the right terms. They're confused about what's out there. They don't understand that a shelter is not housing. So I was just wondering, since you know more than I do, what would be the solution? Because I always tell people you need to focus your hard-earned dollars on where you can go both bang for bucks with things like options housing or John Howard, et cetera. So what do I do? Help. Thanks.
Well, I think to your point, definitions, like if we as community partners with city staff who work in this space all the time aren't clear on definitions, then no wonder the general public is like, where do I put, And I also want to say every one of those services needs support and funding, and every one of those partners has a role to play in the ecosystem. And I think over time, there is a paradigm shift that I think is starting to happen that we also need to lean into. And it's going to be asking some of those questions of like, okay, what is our core kind of fundamental service that we need to offer? Where are things we can let go of? Where are things that we need to lean into more? I mean, that's on the service provision side, but I think when it comes to the definitions, that's the work ahead. The supportive housing audit's a really good opportunity, but I remember being in some of the zoning conversations and struggling to figure out how to refer to certain things. So that is some of the work ahead for the HHLT, but it's a joint exercise, and then getting really clear on how we communicate that out to the public is key.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And there's no further questions for you, Katie. I did really quickly want to say our deepest appreciation. You spoke about the HHLT, and we're going to hear from other members, but you and the Alliance have really stepped up as co-chairs of that entity. And you spoke about the need for collaboration, and that's what we're seeing through that entity. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks. Take care.
Oh, forgive me. Don't go.
Okay.
I have one more question. Sorry, did I see that Councillor Johnson had a question?
There, but I was sort of late to the game, so I can hold them for another delegate if you'd prefer.
No, Katie's still sitting here.
Okay, fabulous. And my apologies for not being there in person today. I'm quite disappointed. So yeah, when it was just in your last sentence there where Katie, you were suggesting that we need to, and I think the city often would love to be able to identify things we can let go of and focus on things that we need, that are central to our work. We're not often afforded that privilege. When I was reading the materials for today, there were sort of two sector players that I was interested in hearing more about. And so I can certainly, and I will plan to ask these questions of staff as well. But given that you're the community lead on the table, where are the other kinds of financial institutions? We're not seeing. I'm not seeing a philanthropic application or stakeholder here. That's one group that I'd be very interested in knowing more about, because I know that, as you say, we there will be groups that fund through a charitable foundation or a community foundation some of these programs and services as well. I find that could be an opportunity to come together. So I'm curious about what work you're doing with the financial sector there. And then also cooperative housing. So you'll hear me talk about cooperative housing several times today if I'm offered the opportunity, because I do believe that they are a place where if we're talking about overhousing in the units that we need for family housing, there's a pipeline there that we can be doing well. But it does involve, I believe, the city taking bigger bites of its role when it comes to supporting co-ops, which is complicated in the sector, given they have other associations and so on that support them. So can you talk a little bit about the financial sector and then also the cooperative sector when it comes to this refresh and what you're hoping to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of what these plans are a good kickstart to, or a jump off, is it's mobilization and buy-in. Like, what's on paper is great, but there's a lot of work to be done on getting buy-in, and buy-in comes with vision. And I think that with the philanthropic sector, what's really interesting is the youth homelessness piece has just taken off. Like, a lot of money has been raised already in terms of contributing to that goal, but it's because it's inspiring and it feels doable. And to me, that's part of the strategy component too. If we just present a plan to, donors, funders, all of those things, I don't know that it's going to necessarily land. They don't see themselves in it. So I think it's also for us as a community and with the city to map out, where do we think we should make a pitch to philanthropists? Where do we think we can build that collective vision? And it does start with us as a sector rowing in the same direction. And so this is really, really helpful that we have that framework. But I really think they need clear guidance on where it's going to have the most impact. And that's the strategy part that's going to be so critical moving forward. If we just say, please donate to these broad general causes, then it's going to be pretty tough to, get alignment. And people will donate where they want to. But I think really giving clear, tangible goals helps people sort of see, okay, that makes sense. I can put it there. But right now, if I was a donor looking at the landscape, I wouldn't know where to put money, to be very honest. I can't speak for co-ops, but in general, I think the more we can move towards leveraging collective equity, big fan of that. I think co-ops are just such a key part of the non-market housing spectrum, and they often get overlooked. And so I don't know what the role will be with the city in terms of supporting co-ops moving forward, but I do think the value of leveraging the collective equity of many co-ops in Ottawa, I hope, is a direction that we move in terms of sustainability, the capital repairs that are required, all those things. We know co-ops need a lot of support, and those operating agreements are coming to an end. So, but again, it's not fair for the city to constantly hold the ball where other levels of government have failed. And so I think the pushback on the feds in particular around co-op funding is key, coming from council directly. But how can we as a community, as a city, support that work? I think if we want to expand co-ops, but also look at just supporting capital repairs, all those sorts of things, I think it's going to look at different models of financing, to be very honest.
Beauty. And I'm ready to champion new models of financing, and I'm ready to, work cross-sectorally to try and achieve those goals. So I'll continue sort of similar lines of questioning with other folks. Thank you so much. And I think we're all just so happy to see you here. I know you've been working for, if not 8 years, then 10 years to try and get this co-design happening. And here it is. And we can feel the creativity, the energy, the buy-in, and I'm just so thrilled to have you where you are, even though, you know, you're destined for all kinds of greater things. We've been so lucky to have you in this role for as long as we have. So thank you again for being able to work together.
Thank you. And I really do want to echo just support for, it does feel like a new relationship is building with the city and community partners. And there's a lot of trust being built. And that's the thing that it just takes time. And so we've taken that time and we have lots of things to build on. So.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you very much, Katie. Our next delegate is Marissa Mohar from the U-Turn Youth Support Services. Welcome, Marissa. You have 5 minutes once you get settled.
Now, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, thank you. Good morning, members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I want to begin by recognizing the City of Ottawa's strong and ongoing commitment to addressing homelessness through the new proposed 10-year plan, and your clear commitment to youth homelessness and ending youth homelessness. That commitment reflects something important. It reflects that the city understands that housing is a basic human right and need, and that we have a responsibility as a community to care for our most vulnerable. And I think Ottawa is showing some real leadership through innovative solutions that are already in effect, like the Master Lease Program, clear collaborative partnerships, accelerator funding, and including people with lived experience in planning moving forward. We're building a system that's really thoughtful and forward-thinking. But we do need to be clear about the urgency of the issue that we're facing in Ottawa with respect to youth homelessness, which is what I'm speaking to today. We don't necessarily know our real actual number, but I can assure you that there are many more youth experiencing homelessness than we really know. It includes youths that are couch surfing, youth that are living in very unsafe housing, youth who are being trafficked. These are the ones that we're not necessarily capturing, and we're not anticipating the wave of young people that are going to be aging out of the child welfare system. So these are really important numbers as we're looking at a system that's going to address and prevent youth homelessness. In the recent point in time count of all homeless numbers in Ottawa, at one point we had about 3,000 across all ages that were homeless in one night. Youth are a part of this critical issue. They are a subset of that number, but a very critical set of that number. And most importantly, youth are not equally effective. The data really demonstrates that about 60% of youth that are experiencing homelessness are coming from the child welfare system. We know that 1 in 3 identify as 2S LGBTQIA facing discrimination within or unsafe housing. Indigenous youth are heavily overrepresented, making partnership with Indigenous organizations vital to this plan. And that many youth are simply facing family conflict and unsafe housing, which is throwing them into homelessness, something that we need to respond to as a city. And the plan must include how we work together to really address the systems that are contributing to homelessness. And I think Katie spoke about this, I think Kale spoke about this really well, that this needs to be a systems level approach. This isn't just about housing somebody. And if we're not fully aligned and we don't see the other areas that young people fall through gaps, then we're going to miss the outcome of really addressing youth homelessness. And so prevention is also very key. And if we are truly going to succeed in ending youth homelessness, our approach really does need to be flexible, responsive, and prevention focused. So to Katie's point around the 10-year plan, what that can easily miss is that the youth that may be homeless today may not be the ones that are most at risk in 5 to 6 years. And so the plan really needs to have that flexibility to be able to respond in real time. And I think it's really promising what's there, particularly working so closely with community partners who are on the ground and know the work and see the trends as they're coming. Youth, so the plan must also evolve in real time. So it's got to include a very strong equity lens in that we really need to address the most vulnerable. Homelessness does not begin when a youth just simply loses their housing. It begins much earlier. It begins when child welfare breaks down. It begins when mental health needs decrease, when a youth is experiencing violence or poverty, and understanding that this is not something that needs to fall exclusively on the shoulders of City Council. It does position for why we need to advocate to other levels of government for better health and social transfers. The city cannot do this alone. It is a systemic issue. So that's an important advocacy piece for the city. And if our homelessness strategy is not deeply connected to those systems, we will always just be responding and not preventing. And we're going to be back in the same situation where we're addressing pretty much the same number of individuals that are homeless. So that prevention is really key. Housing is a first step, but keeping somebody housed is actually not where the work happens. A roof is one piece. It's the stability and the long-term support that's actually required. So when you're looking at supportive housing, that's particularly key for young people. You cannot put a young person in a unit and leave them to figure out how to manage as somebody who is developmentally not capable of living independently. So they need access to mental health supports, they need access to education and employment opportunities. And I say this for all individuals that are experiencing homelessness, but youth in particular. We're dealing with individuals that are developing and maturing into adulthood, and they need specialized supports. Community-based organizations are doing incredible work every day. There's obviously a real commitment to working collaboratively with the existing social services in Ottawa, but that is going to be key, and it's going to be key to prevention as well as intervention and crisis response, because crisis will occur even after you have housed somebody.
So Marissa,
yes,
you have hit time. Do you want to wrap up in about 10
I will.
seconds?
I'm going to wrap up just essentially by saying that I think we're looking at a long-term solution. We're looking at, obviously there's a commitment with a 10-year plan, and there's a clear commitment to looking at it from a system level. So I just really, really want to highlight how important that is and what a good direction this is for the city and how supportive I am of the plan that's proposed today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I know how hard it is to wrap up in 5 minutes, especially when you're under the gun. I don't see any questions for you, but thank you so much for your delegation. I'd now like to invite Mark McDonald from the Alliance to End Homelessness Ottawa to come speak. Welcome, Mark. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Dudas, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Mark McDonald. I sit on the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table representing the lived experience sector. It's no secret that Ottawa is in a housing emergency, and we see record number of families living in hotels, people living in transitional shelters for years, and as we've heard, hundreds more living unsheltered. Our system is congested, our shelter system in particular is congested. As we prioritize lower acuity residents for housing, people with more complex needs are often left waiting for months or years for housing. This wait further compounds challenges like substance use and experiences of abuse and trauma. The opioid crisis has intensified these issues, creating a divide in our city and increasing the stigma towards people experiencing homelessness. Too often, homelessness is automatically linked to substance abuse, but we know very clearly that is not always the case. The 10-year plan aims to address these realities through a coordinated, holistic approach, and it focuses on reinventing and reinvesting in existing affordable housing, expanding the supply of new housing, and ensuring access to affordable housing options that meet diverse needs. Alongside the Mayor's commitment to end youth homelessness by 2030, this positions Ottawa to make real social progress. This plan is shepherded by the HHLT, Its structure is forward-thinking because representation organized by sector, not by individual organizations, increases the quality and consistency of response. It allows us to make decisions that reflect broader community needs. For the first time, 2 seats at the table are dedicated specifically to people with lived experience. And our role is to pull these discussions out of the abstract and bring them down to ground level, to ground them in practical reality. For example, we are currently using a set of surveys to look at heat and cold planning that actually works for people in the street. And we're dealing directly with the homeless people that need our help. For this 10-year plan to actually work, and I believe it will, we must continue to engage meaningfully with people with lived experience of homelessness. Our experiences carry real value. It's not academic, it's lived. That knowledge is essential for effective policy. Inclusion is not an option here, it's absolutely necessary. People with lived experience are experts on the system that affect them, and as a friend and colleague of mine often says, nothing about us without us. And I stand by that this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. You have a question from Councillor Johnson.
Hi, Mark. Nice to see you again. I think we had some good chats at the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition Gala. I'm online, yes. So don't be alarmed. I'm in the I'm in space. I'm so glad that you're here, and I'd love to understand, you know, it sounds like you, in terms of the governance model and sitting as a lived experience member, that this is working for you, that the governance model supports you. Can you tell me a little bit about, you know, whether that was off the top or whether it was a bit of a journey? How did the group support you so that it wasn't, you know, tokenism or other things? Or perhaps there are still some gaps or improvements that can be made in the governance model to make sure that your insights are used appropriately and that you derive meaning from the experience.
Thank you. Well, let me reflect on that for a second. I think the governance model has the potential to serve many different sectors, including the lived experience sector. I really came to the HHLT through my work with the Alliance to End Homelessness, and I've been an employee there for a couple of years. I have a lot of experience on the lived homelessness side personally, which is sometimes surprising to people. I don't think I'm typically homeless, but now that I am working and doing things and living in market rent housing on Elgin Street, I'm able to focus my time on helping and working to bring lived experience input to the HHLT and to the sector in a structured way, in a way that credits what we say is noted, it's not dismissed, it's not debated. What we say is valued. I believe it's valued. I believe my work is valued. And my personal focus is homeless veterans, because I am one or was one. And I'm very happy to see we're moving that forward as well in the plan as announced today. So long answer, but I think I'm valued. I feel valued.
I'm very glad to hear that. I think, you know, we've had different debates around this council table at various departments about how we structure our advisory circles and our advisory committees and working groups and all this sort of stuff. And there's always a push-pull when it comes to involving folks with diverse experiences. So I'm very excited to highlight, you know, and to hear that you feel successful, that the model feels successful, and perhaps it's something that other departments can look at as they're constructing some of their advisory tables as well. So thank you so much for being here and for answering my questions today.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Troster.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Your experience is so valued. And as you may know, as city councillors, we hear from people all the time, right? But we typically hear from people who have the time, the wherewithal, the technology to contact us. And that means they generally are wealthier, right? Like, let's be honest here. And so I get a lot of emails from people who are deeply concerned about homelessness, but very much from the perspective of not being homeless themselves necessarily, right? And those concerns are absolutely legitimate. I'm curious to hear from you. Of course, there's the table, which filters through staff and then filters through counselors. But as political representatives, what are some ways that you think that we can incorporate lived experience of folks who may not contact us, but who are often being written to us about instead of writing to us directly? I've spent time in drop-in centers. Our caseworker does work. We try to use the caseworker that comes into our office to help bolster our policy positions. But I'm just wondering if you have any advice for us as a person with lived experience, having gone through this process, about what more we can do.
Thank you. It's very difficult because at the street level, there is a perception of being ignored by the system. People who have been treated badly or feel they've been treated badly are not necessarily responsive, and they may not even have a phone, and they aren't going to take the time to make input to various feedback loops. And you're absolutely right. The people that have the time and the money and the computer to do that are perhaps going to make comments for you, which are valid. I'm not saying they're not valid, but I think it's a very challenging problem. And that's why I think what we're doing with representatives who are connected to the lived experience sector, and some who are connected to, one important connection would be to bring in input from frontline workers, as they're called, so that the people who are really deeply invested in the street, who are employees of institutions, can be tapped to get more data. We walk around with our surveys trying to get people to fill them in, and it's often those kind of people that take the time to fill it in. And their input is invaluable, absolutely invaluable. I hope that answers your question.
It does, thank you. And I think the example of the warming center conversation that happened throughout the winter is a perfect example of the disconnect that can sometimes happen between our leadership, between the way that we think the system is working, and then what frontline workers are telling us is actually happening. And I think that necessary tension can help us do better, even if we don't always agree. So I really do appreciate that. And I encourage, I know some of you some of my colleagues will serve meals at holidays, at the Mission, for example, but also just spending time in any of our low barrier drop-in centers and just spending half an hour having conversations with people. It's been incredibly valuable to me, and it's a slice of life that you wouldn't see otherwise, and that I think is really important for us all to understand.
If I may, quickly, I'll take that as a question. And I do want to point out HHLT is working right now on summer and winter planning. We're working the lived experience people. We're trying to connect with people on the street. We've got surveys out there, and the city is more than, HHLT can validate the plan for next year. And perhaps there's improvements, but to me, it's a good example of how HHLT functions in a supportive way.
Thank you. And I want to send my kudos to city staff and to the Alliance who apparently have done quite well in incorporating lived experience. I just think your voice is so valuable. I know one of your other members who has lived experience, and I've spoken to her pretty extensively, and we have so much to learn. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm glad you maneuvered that into a response, Mark. That was very helpful. Thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you so much, Chair. And I just really want to thank you for your work. So not so much a question, but I've seen you in the community working in Rideau Rockcliffe and in our community in terms of supports for veterans who are near homelessness. And we see the value in the model and in the investments. And I think that what we also see in terms of this report and the approach that we've taken with this leadership table through co-generation is so important, because it is important that we hear the voices of those who are affected by the system. So I really just wanted to thank you for all the work that you've been doing on behalf of the community for this very powerful delegation, as well as the very powerful written submission that you provided this joint committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you very much, Mark, for being here today. Our next delegation is Andrea Ponia, who is online. I can see you, Andrea. You're welcome to start anytime, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Andrea Ponia, and I'm the coordinator of the Coalition of Community Health and Resource Centers. Our coalition includes 13 multi-service centers across urban, suburban, and rural Ottawa. Together, more than 1,500 staff support over 100,000 residents each year. Through our deep community relationships, cross-sector partnerships, and thousands of volunteers, we form a consistent and connected infrastructure that residents rely on every day. I'm here to express our strong support for the refreshed 10-year housing and homelessness plan. We recognize the city's leadership and commitment to a prosperous, sustainable, and resilient Ottawa. We think the direction is right and that we have an opportunity to fully leverage the existing community infrastructure to deliver on it. To that end, we particularly want to acknowledge 2 priorities in the plan. So the first is priority 2, people get the support they need, and the second is priority 3, we work together. These are not just well-articulated priorities, they're the conditions needed for success. Housing stability is not achieved through housing alone. It's achieved through coordinated systems of care, prevention, and support. And in this, community health and resource centers are deeply aligned with the plan's intent. We appreciate the city's emphasis on collaboration, particularly through the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Team, and are grateful to be at that table. At this moment, we need to move into strategic partnership as a practice, to really go into deep collaboration to get this work off the ground. Community health and resource centers and our place-based partners are not adjacent to this work. We are embedded in it. Every day, we are supporting families transitioning out of shelter, preventing evictions before they occur, helping residents navigate complex systems, and addressing the upstream drivers of homelessness like poverty and isolation and mental wellness and access to care. We are the front door, the connector, and often the stabilizing force. Programs like Families First show what's possible. Funded by the city, Families First supports 400 families annually with a 99% housing stability rate. This program demonstrates that when we invest in wraparound, community-based supports, people stay housed. This isn't theoretical, it's proven and it's cost-effective. And it reflects a broader reality, that prevention works and local access works and community-based care works. We also recognize that housing and homelessness are not experienced equally across our city. Families, newcomers, racialized communities, and communities that experience marginalization are disproportionately impacted, not because of individual circumstances, but because of systemic barriers. Community and health and resource centers and our place-based partners are uniquely positioned to respond because we are place-based, so we're in neighborhoods close to where people live. We're culturally responsive and we're trusted. In order to really move forward in terms of equity, our systems must be designed to meet people where they're at. And we're at a critical moment. We see that demand is increasing and complexity is deepening, and the cost of inaction, both the human costs and the financial costs, continue to rise. So the question before us is, how can we fully mobilize the system required to deliver on the plan? And to do this, we urge the city to continue to deepen integration with place-based wraparound services like the community health and resource centers as core partners in the housing sector, and to sustain and to scale investments in prevention and wraparound supports, and to leverage existing community infrastructure to accelerate and support implementation, and to continue with the great and bold leadership that you've been already doing, and in order to coordinate and have an equity-informed plan. And we wanted to come today just to express that the CHRCs, the coalition of CHRCs, are ready to, we want to work with you. We bring infrastructure and reach, we bring those relationships, and we bring the experience. And of course, we bring a shared commitment to ensure that every person in Ottawa has not just housing, but the support, stability, and dignity to sustain it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. You have a question from Councillor Johnson.
Hi, nice to see you here, Andrea. So I'd love for you to help us understand in neighborhoods that are served by community health and resource centers where families are housed or individuals are housed. What in some of my interactions with community health and resource centers that support College Ward, I understand that some of those support services don't really have a budget line, that they're sort of cobbling together other pieces of funding. to try and meet these needs. Can you expand a little bit more about how financially the community health and resource centers react or respond to those neighborhoods?
Yeah, thank you for raising that. It's really, I think it demonstrates the benefit of having these multi-service centers because we are able to leverage funding, and that's what we have to do because we really see these centers as being like never being the wrong door. So when people show up, we're not going to turn them away because we don't have a specific service dedicated to that. And so, our crisis intake services are, they're a drop-ins that are offered throughout the city at all the CHRCs. And when people come in, we'll support them with whatever's needed. And that includes a lot of practical supports. And so there was a time when those drop-in programs were, someone would come in, we would help them with a situation. It would last 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and off they would go. But increasingly, we're practically case managing people in the neighborhoods, so they're coming in, we're helping them to fill out a form, we're helping them to, navigate them to the school where their kids have to go, we're supporting them through all of these different systems, and then they're coming back again the next week and we're doing another hour-long session, and this can go on for years. So it's really taking those the funding that we have for these drop-in intake, referral, navigation, practical supports, and they're just stretched to the max, I have to say. In some centers, look at it in a rural context. If you look at Western Ottawa Community Resource Center, this service, they have a full day where they're filling out LEAP and OESP forms, which are these forms these really support people to maintain housing because they're helping them to apply for benefits regarding their hydro. And so that's a full day of service every week that they're having to use towards that they're not able to then do other things. We see that even like the community developers that are in neighborhoods supporting people to resolve conflict, supporting people to navigate conversations with their landlords. I mean, it's just that all of our services are being reoriented towards sort of these crisis response and crisis supports as the crisis intensifies. We're just dedicating so much time towards that. So it is creating less time for other wraparound supports, for the preventative work. And so it's just like we're just juggling and we're putting out fires and doing our best. But it is a really significant challenge. And you're right, these services aren't fully funded. If we look at Families First, that is funded by the city. That's one example. But our crisis intake services are doing a huge load in terms of supporting people living in hotels and motels, in terms of supporting people who are living in market rent, who are on the verge of homelessness, and so on. It's a really big administrative burden to living in poverty, and people don't know where to turn, how to navigate it, and we're supporting them to do that.
Thank you for those examples. I think they're helpful when, I know that as a counselor, I have, strong leadership and strong response from my community health and resource centers. I know that you rise to the challenge. It is helpful for me to understand what those specific pressures are so that when I am speaking to my MPP and my MP about what is not working, I have more clear understanding of where, you know what I mean? Like if you just do everything as best you can, I don't always have the way to parse out where you need help. Some of the concerns that I have, in the populations that we see that are experiencing homelessness in College Ward is really around young people and youth mental health, homework help, these types of things. As you say, you're so caught up with the crisis response. I'm anxious for those young people who are living in hotels and motels for extended periods of time. I'm concerned that they're not able to, that they're learning that there's a learned helplessness or just a complete abandonment and disillusionment with the system, right? And so, certainly going to speak more to that in other reports this spring. And I'd love to invite you back to talk about those when we get there. Thank you.
We'd be happy to do that. And just on the point of the we also do after school programs and free summer camps, free after school programs, free summer camps across the city. And that is what lets parents stay and go to work. I mean, school ends at 3, work ends at 5. So it's a free service. So that's a really good point of how we support the labor of these people so that they can continue to work and that they can remain housed. So happy to talk more about it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Troster.
Hi, Andrea. Nice to see you. As you know, there's a shift going on in terms of provincial policy when it comes to addiction. The Somerset West Community Health Centre was forced to close its supervised consumption site. Now the province is defunding sites across the province. I know that in my ward, it certainly added pressure to our other community health center. It added pressure at Centertown Community Health Center because Somerset West was no longer allowed to even do needle exchange or basic harm reduction work. So, so it created significant pressure on our other community health center. And now with this shift happening province-wide, citywide, I'm just wondering, from the perspective of this housing and homelessness plan, what demands you think you're going to be seeing and how you think this plan can help address it. What I keep saying is, if we're moving away from one model, we need a heck of a lot more supportive housing where people can do what they want in their own homes, right? But if they don't have those homes, they don't have those supports. Right now, they're on the street in my neighborhood and very, very visible. I'm just interested in your perspective on what you're seeing, what you're hearing from the sector about this shift, and what we can expect to see and what you think you will need from the city and from other levels of government.
Definitely a huge concern. I mean, it's frightening to think about what's going to happen in these neighborhoods where these services are so highly needed. And I think what we're realizing is that, it's really important to have wraparound supports for those folks that are there. So, and social services like drop-ins. In terms of the plan, I think it's that focus on prevention. So, it's like seeing the drop-ins for homeless people where they can spend some time, where they can be safe, but also, as far as our services go to support the rest of as we support the rest of the community, we really see the value in things in preventative services, like, for example, in community development. It's community development that works with a neighborhood to build a garden, to build a community garden, to paint a mural. It's things like this that make neighborhoods feel safe. It really is. I can't understate it enough. If the trash is managed in a neighborhood, and who manages that trash is residents who come together through community development, who make their neighborhoods feel, who identify priorities. And that's a priority that they would like to work on, is making their neighborhood feel safer by removing trash. This is something that is a really good example of how neighborhoods feel safer for kids, for everyone. Whenever we have this type of vitality in our neighborhoods, it brings people out, it creates more eyes on the street, and that all of that makes for safer neighborhoods. So that's something that I think community development, we are seeing a lot of crisis in neighborhoods already before these upcoming changes. So there's going to be even more crisis in neighborhoods. The community developers and the peers and the residents that they support to build leadership are there to help to navigate this and help to diffuse a little bit the tensions that we see in neighborhoods. I can't understate the importance of that community development function. And then also just those social services, being able to continue to offer that practical supports, then system navigation, and then the drop-ins where homeless people themselves can be safe and, can be themselves during the day and in the evenings and so on, like we were talking about with the warming centers and so on.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my former caseworker spent a lot of time talking to unhoused folks in our neighborhood, and the number one thing they said was, we don't think there's any place we're allowed to be. Nobody wants us. There's no place to go. And that frustration is really, really high. So I know there's the new heart hubs. Center 507 in my ward is consistently overflowing. It's open 24 hours a day. There is such an overflow impact. And I agree with you about the community development piece, because I think there tends to be backlash against our community service providers when that overflow piece happens, when in fact, they just need to be able to scale to meet the need. The need is just higher than it's ever been.
It's true. And if you look at another example is in Dundonald Park, there's an Indigenous drumming circle, and that's one that includes the homeless people can come, and they do come and they participate, and it's got a lot of vitality, and it's helped to keep Dundonald Park safer. And there's been a lot of feelings around Dundonald Park. So, that's another good example of like helping to bridge the gap between the people who are experiencing the crisis and their neighbors, helping to bridge understanding that, we're all one big community and we all belong here is really important.
I agree with you. And yeah, that drumming circle really is wonderful. And I think sometimes people have preconceived notions about the safety of that park that are based on a few years ago instead of what's happening right now. But there's been a lot more social piece there. And I think that is because of that important community engagement. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you very much, Andrea, for being here. Our next delegation is Benjamin Apori. And I understand Benjamin is online. Okay. Welcome, Benjamin. When you get started, you'll have 5 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the proposal today. My name is
Sorry,
Benjamin.
Benjamin, I'm
Yeah.
going to stop you before you get started, only because we're having a little bit of difficulty hearing you. I don't know if it's maybe moving a little closer to the microphone, but it's a little muffled. Do you want to just try saying a couple words?
Yes. How about now?
Hold on one sec. I'll let the amazing team here try to figure it out.
Oh. I'm not sure if this helps. Or...
Oh, that's much better. Much better.
Okay.
Okay. All right. 5 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Benjamin Corey. I do appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to the committee today. Through my work at the Ottawa Mission, I met someone who had a job and was stable until a sudden accident forced him into a complex and slow system. Despite doing everything right, the support he needed didn't arrive in time. His situation became more stressful, and without flexibility from his landlord, he lost his house. What stood out to me was this: he didn't need a shelter; he needed timely support before things escalated. This is why prevention must be at the center of our approach. First, prevention is more cost-effective. The cost of helping someone stay housed is far lower than the cost of emergency shelter, healthcare, and long-term support when stability is lost. Second, prevention keeps people working and contributing. The individual I met had a job. With a timely support, he could have remained stable and avoided the entire system at hand. And third, prevention reduces pressure on our shelter system. Acting early helps individuals while also freeing up resources for those who have no other options. However, the current system is not structured to prevent these situations effectively. Too often, support arrives too late. Delays in accessing assistance allows manageable situations to escalate into crisis. At the same time, the process itself can be overwhelming. For someone already dealing with stress, navigating complex bureaucracy becomes a barrier rather than a pathway to stability. And by the time help arrives, the opportunity for prevention has already passed. To address this, the city must strengthen its focus on prevention in two key ways. First, by increasing target funding for homelessness prevention programs, particularly those that provide rapid financial assistance and early intervention. And second, by building stronger partnerships with landlords to create flexibility in moments of crisis, so that temporary setbacks do not result in permanent accidents. These are immediate practical measures that can prevent people from ever entering shelter systems. At its core, this is about how we choose to respond as a city. We can continue to react after people lose their housing, or we can act earlier when stability is still within reach. The difference is not just financial, it is human. It is the difference between someone staying on their feet or falling into a system that is much harder to live. We have the opportunity to act before that happens, to make prevention not just a goal, but a priority backed by real action. I urge the committee to strengthen its investment in homeless prevention and ensure that timely support is available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. I'm not seeing any. Oh, my co-chair has a question for you, so hold on one second. Chair Leeper.
Thank you very much. Benjamin, thanks for the presentation today, and I hope we'll see you back out when it comes budget time. Well, I'm sorry, I missed at the beginning of your presentation. What was the support that would have assisted your the individual that you've talked about? What is the support that would have prevented housing loss?
I think given the fact that I was more so conversant with a lot of the resources around the place, I was useful in that regard to educate the person in question. I think more awareness into how to navigate the system is something of a practical solution to. And it was incredibly. I find that it's incredibly destabilizing because more often than not, people have a problem alternately figuring out simple things like the the technology or the how to navigate the bureaucracy or what documents is required and all those practical things like things like that, if you will. And I find that I find that incredibly more so a barrier, if you will. People struggle a lot to navigate themselves, especially when things remain very much uncertain, and especially when you're under stress. So just to cut the long story short here, I think making people more aware and simplifying the process, if you will be more will be better off if you get to kind of curb those situations.
Okay, thank you for that. That's useful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair Leeper. Benjamin, I'm not seeing any further questions for you. Thank you very much for being here and sharing your experience. I'll now invite our next delegation, Josiah Frith from the Lower Town Community Association. Josiah, welcome. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Josiah Frith. I'm a resident and business owner in Lower Town and vice president of the Lower Town Community Association. I want to speak about homelessness, but also about what happens when the way we respond to it begins to affect an entire community. Because what we're experiencing in Lower Town is not just a housing crisis. It's what happens when a system becomes unbalanced and stays that way for too long. Over time, we have concentrated a significant portion of the city's homelessness services into one neighborhood, shelters, drop-ins, outreach, crisis care, all layered into the same small geographic area. At the same time, this neighborhood has the function of a place where people live, raise families, run businesses, and try to build a sense of normal, everyday life. Layered on top of that, the Byward Market is one of the city's primary nightlife districts. So what we have now is an overlap. People in crisis, residents, workers, visitors, late-night crowds, all sharing the same limited space at all hours of the day and night. And those realities are being asked to coexist without adjustment. The result is pressure. We see it in our parks, our streets, our businesses, and in the people who rely on these services, who are often left waiting in a system that has become overwhelmed. This is not a failure of individuals, it is a failure of structure. But I want to be very clear about something. The answer is not to simply move this pressure somewhere else. It is not to take what's happening in Lower Town and replicate it in other wards or shift it into other business and entertainment districts. People should not be excluded from community because they are struggling. And we should not be designing systems that push people from one place to another. What we need is something different. We need an early intervention so that families and individuals don't reach crisis in the first place. We need safe, stable spaces distributed across the city where people can land, recover, and move forward. And we need those spaces to be small enough and supported enough that they actually function as a part of the community, not apart from it. Because care does not scale through crowding, it scales through connection. And connection requires that people have access to support in environments that are stable, predictable, and integrated into everyday life. Right now, we have too many people in one place with too few exits and too little distribution of responsibility. That's what needs to change. The solution is achievable. It starts with housing, small-scale, transitional housing that isn't concentrated downtown, but distributed amongst each of the city's 24 wards, with real wraparound supports, because if we share the responsibility, we give people a real chance, and we give all of our neighborhoods a chance to thrive again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You have a question from Councillor Plante.
Hi, thank you for coming. This wasn't long ago you were here for the Byward Market, so thank you for always advocating for our beautiful community. I really appreciate it. I did have a question because I was thinking as you were chatting, and I know you have not so littles, but you do have kids. They're not so little anymore. And there was an article, I think about 2 weeks ago, about the bus service and how they're going to be picking up kids now and busing them 2 blocks or whatever, because it is dangerous for some of them to walk to school. Now, I know yours take the bus to go to a further location, but I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the experience of kids. You've sort of seen it firsthand with your own kids in the neighborhood, and you did reference parks. So just wondering if I could give you the floor and give you an opportunity to talk about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. They're little, but not little. And yeah, I was actually, when I was asked to speak here today, I discussed this with them because especially my 12-year-old is now starting to be very pure focused and definitely becoming a teen and likes to spend time at the mall, likes to be have a lot of independence. And we discussed, what would happen? What do they think would happen if something were to happen to myself or their mother? And what would be the process, that they would go through as young people? It was a very enlightening conversation to have with them. They talked about all their friends and the friends' parents that they got along with, but they also talked about the struggles in their friends' homes and the pressures that would put on their friends' homes. So they're even at 12, they're very acutely aware of the social issues that surround them, and they see it every day. But at the same time, my 12-year-old walks by himself through the market, to meet friends and things like that. It's a very safe neighborhood. We have this strange dichotomy where we have a perception of unsafety, but the reality is that the lack of safety is mostly for the individuals who are already in crisis. And that's the thing that we experience as a community as a frustrating measure, because we often get blamed, for saying, being called NIMBYs or whatever it is. And to a person, everybody that I talk to in Lower Town and the Byward Market is compassionate about this issue, wants to see real change, wants to see individuals, reintegrated into society. And yeah, we don't want to be the poster children for this anymore. It's not a dysfunction of Lower Town or the Byward Market, but it is a dysfunction of the system that we've had up until now, where we feel like the best case scenario is to concentrate these services and make large institutions, and that just has not borne out in really helping people.
Yeah, I wanted to just sort of piggyback on that too, because when the article came out about the busing and I had people reach out to me who had been involved in the advocacy around getting those buses to go just a couple streets to be able to drop their kids off either at York or at St. Anne. The typical scenario that I see in that situation is, for example, mom is a PSW. She starts work at 6 a.m. and they live at 360 Murray, which is an OCH tower. And then there's 3 kids. And the 15-year-old is responsible for getting the 10-year-old and the 7-year-old off to school. And then the 15-year-old has to get to high school taking whatever bus he needs to take. And so for them, that busing system is a lifesaver because it does enable them to get where they need to go on time. Now, does it make the neighborhood less walkable? Is it stigmatized? Sure, all those things can be true at the same time. But we are now, it's wild to me that we have a busing service that is responding to something that is so high level and lacking in investments from upper levels of government. We're doing everything we can. You sort of mentioned it at this level. But it's wild to me, the little corners that it touches, like the school busing system being one of them. So I just thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I don't see any further questions for you. Very much appreciate you being in attendance. Our next delegation is Mike Bulthuis from the Ottawa Community Land Trust. And Mike, I believe you're online. You're welcome to start at any time.
Thanks very much. And good morning, councillors. Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay, I saw the clock not moving, so I'm grateful to have a few minutes to speak with you this morning. So I'm part of the team at the Ottawa Community Land Trust, or the OCLT, which is a local nonprofit operating as a social enterprise with a mission to collaborate with partners in the community to acquire, steward, and develop land in order to preserve and expand affordable housing. And of course, we're in full agreement with the plan's 10-year vision that you're looking at this morning. I believe that our work over the past few years demonstrates this support. And as a few quick updates, in several weeks, we anticipate closing on our third acquisition, a 31-unit residential apartment building in the Riverview Park neighborhood, bringing to 47 the number of affordable apartment units that we've removed from the speculative market and placed under community ownership to protect affordability. And since 2024, we've raised nearly $4 million and counting in community investment through the sale of Housing Forever bonds, helping to capitalize our own revolving fund to enable these and future acquisitions. Indeed, as noted in the 10 years plan's key takeaways for policy and planning, more deeply affordable and supportive housing is urgently needed, and municipal efforts alone are not enough. And that's what really drives our work at the OCLT, building a community entity that bolsters the efforts of the city, our sector partners, and other levels of government, weaving together different sources of capital and capacity. And we want to express our support for the three priorities and offer our assistance in advancing them. Of course, our work is focused on the first priority, that everyone has a home. At the OCLT, we're particularly seized with the goal of preserving existing affordable housing and maintaining and growing the supply of community housing. Through our acquisition efforts, raising capital, including community investment, philanthropic capital, and some ward-based funds from several city councillors, we're preserving existing modestly affordable residential buildings and working hard to grow our community housing portfolio by transferring assets from the speculative market to community. And through our first two purchases in Ottawa's Carlington and Vanier neighborhoods, we've created additional meaningful affordability pathways with units offered on RGI basis and to tenants supported by other community organizations like the Wabano Centre. To this end, as you measure progress on the first priority, I would encourage the city to pay attention to the varied ways of growing affordable and community housing beyond only the development of new community housing. We also echo the belief that sustainability and growth can be advanced through transformation in the community housing sector, including through mergers and acquisitions. We're actually working on a specific CMHC-funded solutions lab right now to explore the potential of these models, working with about a dozen local operators, including potentially what would be the impact of transferring assets into a community land trust. Now, our work also serves as a support to the plan's second priority, specifically the goal of preventing housing loss. We know that not only do acquisitions of naturally occurring affordable housing ensure affordability on non-market land in perpetuity, but they're also an immediate and incredibly effective way to sustain tenancies and prevent evictions. And of course, our work is founded on the premise of the plan's third priority, namely that we work together, piloting new approaches and implementing successful solutions. Beyond the 47 OCLT housing units that I mentioned earlier, we're currently working to acquire our fourth property, in this case from another nonprofit entity in the city, as they raise funds to develop new non-market housing. So our interest here is, as the report notes, to protect the decades of community history and public investment that have gone into this property and ensure that we expand non-market and affordable housing in Ottawa at the same time. Now, in this deal, our aim is to lease the property to another nonprofit operator. And in fact, we're currently in advanced discussions with several charitable nonprofits, each desiring to grow their offerings and working together to acquire properties that they could then lease from us. We're really envisioning a community portfolio. Now, when we began to sell community bonds in 2024, we quickly realized that among local investors, the purchase of a bond wasn't so much about helping to grow the OCLT. It was more about helping to preserve and grow Ottawa's affordable housing. It's a community-fueled, community-first approach. It's why individuals, organizations, and businesses continue to invest, concretely participating in the creation of a community portfolio. And so in closing, I want to simply challenge us all, hoping that we can always have our eyes on considering not just what the city can do, but what the city can help to catalyze, especially in creating a more resilient and sustainable housing sector. In every action that we take, are we always prioritizing the permanence of impact rather than a temporary project-based outcome? How can we maximize the value of capital? How might public funding be catalytic and help crowd in other funding sources? How might the city, when funding for municipal acquisitions is available, help to support the sector to strengthen and respond? In some cases, could the city's capital be stretched across additional projects by catalyzing community contributions? Are we fully leveraging the community's wealth in this equation, and in this way always maximizing space for community within the 10-year plan? I know I speak on behalf of the OCLT and all of our members and community investors that we look forward to further collaboration with you in helping realize our ambitious and critical goal of creating a community where everyone has access to stable and secure housing. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much. You have a question from Chair Leeper.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mike, thank you very much for the presentation today. When I read the five-year refresh report, it really did strike me, and I'm sure it's not lost on many, that the preservation of affordable housing is put in terms of putting in the necessary capital to ensure that we're maintaining the existing stock of community housing that we have. And obviously that's critical, but it really doesn't speak to the acquisition of what might be in the private market today and trying to preserve that as that affordable housing. And I'm just wondering, should the plan speak more to that?
I would encourage those that monitor progress on the plan to definitely keep that in mind and to measure that. And so if that would be including that as one of the stated outcomes of the goals, I think that would be a really helpful thing. We know, and I think everybody on this call is familiar with the 31-to-1 ratio of units that are affordable that we lose for every new one that is built. And that is effectively creating for us a deeper and deeper hole to get out of. And so I think if we really want to measure progress towards the ultimate goal of secure and adequate and affordable housing for everyone, it would be really wise for us to measure the rate at which we are maintaining existing affordable housing that is currently on the speculative market. And so acquisitions that we know are successful in other cities across Ontario and across the country have proven to be a really effective way of helping to stabilize that. So I think that would be a great addition. I know that existing community housing also needs additional capital for it to be sustained as good housing. But I think there are ways that we can explore, even in the preservation of affordable housing, to work together to ensure the quality of that housing is maintained as well. So sorry, that was a long answer,
No,
but
I appreciate it. Thank you.
I would support adding that.
This council a few years ago explicitly rejected creating an acquisition fund, unfortunately, something that I would hope we'd be able to revisit in future. So how else might the city make what you call a catalyzing investment in the acquisition of housing?
I think the one thing, I mean, an acquisition fund, sometimes I worry that when folks hear an acquisition fund, they hear an idea that, say, 100% of the capital of a cost should be awarded by, using public funds. And I think we've seen some examples recently where the city has made acquisitions where 100% of the capital has been from government. I don't think that's always necessary. I think what we are showing is that there is community capital that is available. And so I think from the point of view of acquisitions, it can be one slice of a financing stack that brings together other sources. And in that way, the limited public funding that is there, and we know it's limited, can be stretched across that many more projects. I think some of the capital can be repayable. I think real estate is an area where even within the non-market sector, the value of properties will grow and we can repay that. And so I think low-income financing or low-cost financing from the city can also support. We have found that in our acquisition activity, finding guarantors for bridge facilities from a lender can help unlock certain opportunities. We know and we're grateful that on the first acquisition we made, we have an agreement with the city for rent supplements. Those rent supplements ensure affordability, and as the owner, they ensure a revenue stream for us to be able to continue in that work. We're currently working with both EnviroCentre and the Ottawa Climate Action Fund to look at what we can do on some of these properties to help ensure climate responsibility and ensure retrofits are pursued if possible. I think funding to support that kind of capacity building work would also be really helpful. So I think there are different ways of pitching in at the time of acquisition, but then also assisting in the longer term operations, right? I know that the city offers significant, housing supplements and housing benefits. Many of those are within the private sector. That's effective in finding secure tenancies, but those capital resources are sometimes lost into the private sector. Whereas, I think what I want to challenge us is, are we actually helping to build a resilient and sustainable non-market sector? Because we know that that's the best way to secure affordability in perpetuity.
Fantastic. We're going to have a debate about inclusionary zoning coming up, and I know we'll have that discussion around the role of the private sector versus the role of the not-for-profit sector in trying to ensure that we have sustainable, affordable housing in perpetuity. So appreciate your raising that. I would ask you to spill the beans on those future acquisitions, but I know you won't. So I would invite you to come see me whenever you have a chance. Chair, thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. You have a question from Councillor Johnson.
Mike, I was hoping that you might be able to expand a little further on the solutions lab that you're working on, because I know there's a couple solutions labs, or maybe it's just the same solutions lab that I'm thinking of with Nepean Housing, but there is conversation in the sector about mergers, consolidations, acquisitions as a way of strengthening releasing capital, making capital available, and strengthening your overall responsiveness to demands of the current market. So could you tell me more and tell this council more about what you're finding so far and what you might see for the city in some of those solutions?
Absolutely. Yeah, and Ottawa, we're very fortunate in that there are, I think, 4 or 5 different CMHC funded solutions labs currently active. And I mention that because it's a kudos to the sector and for the desire to be innovative and pursue new approaches. And certainly the city is participating in some, if not all of those. The one that I think you mentioned is, or the one that I refer to is in fact co-led with Nepean Housing. So I think we are talking about the same one. So this is a lab called Forward Together. And really what we are exploring is how can we pursue a future where existing organizations or the existing community housing portfolio is made more resilient. And sometimes that could be through things like mergers and amalgamations. And we've seen that here in Ottawa. I think most folks are familiar with, say, the MHI and Gloucester amalgamation or others. We also know that sometimes those conversations begin when organizations are in a kind of reactive position, right? Perhaps they are experiencing a fiscal crisis or a capital backlog, and in order, and they reach a point where there is no sustainable future, and so something is kind of prescribed onto them. We also know that sometimes consolidations can help, and they can actually help our organizations further the missions that they were created to pursue. And so what the lab is really trying to do is create space for a community-led conversation about how to do this and secure a future where we can be sustainable and grow. So, and then I think in addition to the mergers and amalgamations, the OCLT, the Ottawa Community Land Trust, has been brought into this conversation to present another potential path forward, right? And so we know that in community land trusts across the country, especially within the cooperative housing sector, we've seen co-ops that sometimes are struggling or sometimes simply would like to grow but don't have the leverage, they don't have the equity to support that growth. We're exploring, would there be an appetite for some co-ops to potentially transfer assets into a community land trust, thereby being part of a larger portfolio with greater access, while at the same time sustaining their independent cooperative operations. And we know that that's a possibility. So as part of the lab, we've been in conversation with a number of local co-ops. Again, not just ones that are experiencing financial challenges, but ones that would like to grow or maybe build, but don't have the capacity to do that on their own. And so we're looking at whether the CLT can be a path in that. But the lab is certainly bringing together about a dozen, both nonprofit and co-op housing actors in Ottawa.
Okay, very cool. So, and then with respect to co-ops, obviously co-ops, again, their individual identities are very important to them. That's kind of within their sort of 7 principles, guiding principles, but knowing that, there is a tremendous amount of potential in the co-op sector for redevelopment, where do they fit in some of these conversations, be able to retain the sort of independent governance that is so integral to that model, but also be able to consolidate maybe or bring together some of the assets that they hold?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, there are a number that are part of that lab. I think some co-ops struggle with ongoing governance, right? I mean, some, especially smaller co-ops, might struggle with finding the members that have a desire and a willingness to kind of lead on the governance side or lead on the asset management side. And so I think that there are co-ops that are interested in exploring other means to both support their longevity, but also maybe minimize or find additional support in the areas where they are challenged. I think that another element of this is, and Katie so well spoke earlier about, how can we better leverage and utilize that collective equity that is in the sector. We know that some of them are on land that is leased, either from the city or from other levels of government. And there are conversations around, with those with tenure for that title, if that was transferred perhaps to a land trust or perhaps to another organization or to the co-ops themselves, that would immediately grant access to further equity and could unlock opportunities either to upgrade existing assets or help them in growth as well. And so it is I think we are at a point of inflection where a lot of those operating and mortgage agreements are coming to an end, and there are conversations about the future. And I think the land trust is certainly here to be one potential partner in finding those longer term solutions. Co-ops, of course, as you've so rightly said, I mean, the members themselves have to drive that future. But I think, what we're trying to do is present options that enable that independence to continue while adding some strength where possible.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm certainly very excited about the various solutions labs that are coming through CMHC here in the city of Ottawa. And I'll look forward to how we might share the results, or maybe there's presentations that could be made to members of committee and council as those results come forward. I'd like to be able to formalize that knowledge sharing beyond just the bureaucracy, but to the elected officials themselves. So we can think about that as some of those milestones are met. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Kelly.
Very much, Chair. Thank you for being here today, Mike. I've always been interested in your approach to this issue, and I know we met at the beginning of the term, and I think the first time I actually met was in a Teams call or a Zoom call when I was still working on Parliament Hill for an MP, and we were talking about affordable housing. So I've chatted with you a few times about this and been interested in it. You keep using the term non-market, but when I hear your approach to this, the way I think about it is almost as if you're establishing a different market that, doesn't necessarily have to compete directly with the other bigger players. And I know that you own assets, and I've always been, interested in what groups like yours do or could achieve if they had the right amount of capital and as you build up assets. So I'm thinking of a scenario where a building might come on the market that you're interested in, but all of a sudden you would be competing against, some of the more well-funded or private operators in the market. Are you at a point where you own enough assets that you can use it to leverage, as leverage to borrow money? So like if you have a sale that you want to achieve or a purchase that you want to achieve, rather than trying to raise the money in that short period of time, that you could borrow it against what you already own, buy the building, and then use the assets that you have as financial leverage to raise money and build more homes. So I just wanted to see if that's the end goal and how the city, and I know you've already been asked this, but what can we do as a city to help get you there?
Yeah. Thanks so much. Our portfolio is still small, right? That third acquisition is one that we waived all of our. Anyways, we look forward to closing on that one within the coming weeks, and that will bring us to the 47 units. But absolutely, on our financing for that third one, we are leveraging. It's little, but we are leveraging the equity that we have in our first two properties, and then through the community bonds to help ensure that we have a financing package and a commitment now from our lender on that third one. So, I think we are developing a model that is not unique to us. We're looking at other social purpose real estate folks from across the country. But to your question, we are getting to that point, and I think the potential for that is only going to grow. And so, we refer to ourselves as non-market, similar to the nonprofit and co-op housing space. I think there is a lot of terminology in this space, and I think increasingly we're sort of, I think some of us put all of the sort of nonprofit co-op under that non-market banner, essentially to say that we are not financialized, right? We need to cover our costs. We need a viable business model, but we're not looking to earn a profit to return to our shareholders or anything like that. I was going to say, I think, the city has made some really important acquisitions in the past number of years. But I will simply say that there are sometimes conversations in response to those where it's like, if the capital that was needed for those acquisitions had been given to or shared with a non-market actor to make those same purchases, those non-market actors might actually be able to use the equity now to further expand their own portfolio and to grow further. And that's where and I know that sometimes the funding conditions don't allow for that. But I think having that as a question is a really important and potentially game-changing kind of way to look at this, right? So that it's not just the capital for one purchase, but it's the capital that's helping to grow a portfolio that, again, can be leveraged for further growth. And there's no shortage of opportunities. I mean, we have owners of buildings coming to us, and I know it's a softer market right now, but we've had this now for some time, who would love for their properties to be transferred into something like the land trust. So I think that's where I'm coming to, you know, what can we do to help grow that base? We are still in those early years, but if we can strengthen that foundation, then it will become recycling, right? The capital will be recycled from one to another.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kelly. Thank you very much, Mike, for being here today. I want to welcome Warren Waters, who has patiently been sitting here waiting. Thank you for being so prompt and finding your spot. You're from the Federation of Citizens Associations. You have 5 minutes, Warren.
Thank you. Chair, councillors, thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Vice Chair of the Federation of Citizens Associations. And before I retired, I'd spent 20 years with the World Bank helping governments house people in some of the most challenging environments in Asia and Africa. But this isn't just professional for me, it's personal. My uncle lived in shelters on and off for many years as he struggled with alcoholism, and my own half-brother died in one. I know firsthand that housing people who lack money, health, or family support is incredibly difficult. But I also know that it can be done. And the Federation sent me here today because we want this plan to work. Next slide. Making the plan work. The vision in the plan's good. I've heard about vision, strategy, principles, but the plan is lacking something. There's no clear map. It's simply a wish list. To turn it into real progress, we need 5 specific fixes. First, we need to know where we're aiming to be in 3 years. Who's responsible for what? Specifically, I think we need targets for how we're housing the most vulnerable neighbors, how fast we're moving people into homes, and making sure that they're staying housed long term. Secondly, we need to create a plan B. The plan's relying heavily on money from the federal and provincial government, but what if that money doesn't come? We need a contingency plan to show exactly how the city's going to shift priorities if the funding falls short. Thirdly, we need clear definitions. This has been discussed earlier by Katie. Last year, Council said they defined terms like transitional housing, shelters, reception centres, once they were allowed in all residential areas. We're still waiting. Without clear definitions, residents, builders, and service providers are left in the dark. We can't measure progress if we haven't defined what we're aiming for. Fourthly, we need to match services to buildings. Bricks and mortars aren't enough. If we build a new unit but don't fund the mental health and addiction care that goes with it, we aren't creating a home, we're creating a temporary fix that's destined to fail. And fifthly, as also been mentioned earlier, it's much cheaper to keep an existing affordable unit than it is to build a brand new one. So we need real incentives to preserve deeply affordable housing that we already have, so we aren't stuck paying for expensive replacements later. Why does that matter? Why are these 5 things important? We're asking for these changes because past plans have struggled. They lacked clear accountability. The math didn't add up. The public ended up confused. Right now, the math is simple and brutal. Next slide, please. More people are entering the system than leaving it. Next slide. More people are entering the system than leaving it. We aren't housing people. We're warehousing them. For the people trapped in the system, there are only a few ways out. Stay stuck in shelters, hospitals, or prisons. Move into supportive housing that too often doesn't actually have supports. Death. And a few lucky people get a real home. But lucky is not a strategy. We need to break the cycle. When a system fails, they kick back. As more people are forced into shelters, the problem becomes more visible. The public sees millions of dollars being spent, while the number of people on the street only grows. People lose heart. They lose patience. They stop believing homelessness can actually be solved. When the city loses public trust, it often reaches for quick fixes. They might look good in a press release, but they make the problem worse. We call this homelessness theater. Everyone's doing what they should be doing, but the outcome is still disaster because no one is looking at the whole picture. Next slide, please. Today we have to stop the theater. Give us a plan with the definitions, the plan B, and the short-term milestones we need to actually bring about housing our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Warren. You have a question from Councillor Plante.
Yes, hi, thank you, Warren. I really appreciated this presentation a lot as someone who lives in the neighborhood just up the way from you. And I do want to add, I think there's something that we're not taking into consideration here with this conversation is, and I hear this all the time from either shelter staff or shelter clients who I talk to almost every day, is that Ottawa seems to have become a bit of a magnet for people coming from everywhere all over the province, whether it be for the, there's kind of this lore that we are very robust in our social services here. And that we seem to not be able to stop the bleeding just as long as that lore exists. Now, obviously no one here is opposed to people moving to the Ottawa area. I'm personally not from the Ottawa area, so I very much take that to heart. But it's something I do hear all the time, that there is 20 people came today, 10 people came yesterday, and there just seems to be no mechanism to stop the bleeding. So I was just wondering if you could comment on that as someone who lives in the neighborhood.
Well, I think the plan's making a number of assumptions that may not turn out to be true. We're assuming that modernizing the waitlist system is going to improve outcome, but evidence shows that placement into social housing has actually declined due to limited unit turnover, not administrative inefficiencies. There is a sense that we were aiming for homelessness to be rare, brief, and non-recurring, but the average length of stay is actually increasing. So we're going in the opposite direction, as Katie mentioned. The plan is emphasizing system integration, whereas the problem might actually be lack of anywhere to live. So we have to stop fooling ourselves with fancy slogans. We have to start questioning these assumptions.
That being said, and I did just send a message to both the general manager and to Mr. Brown. I was wondering if they would maybe just take a direction or do something on the definitions. I know there's not necessarily alignment with the planning staff on some of the definitions of the housing we are providing. Is that something maybe we could look into?
So, Councillor Plante, we're going to move into questions to staff immediately after.
Perfect.
Mr. Waters,
okay,
so
I'll do
maybe
it then.
we'll
Great.
speak to that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, we still have a question for you, Warren. Chair Leeper.
Thank you very much, Chair. Warren, thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate your providing me with a quick look at that before this meeting. And as we were running through the various different delegations and the questions that were being asked, I felt as though we were kind of knocking a number of these off. They've all been addressed, whether satisfactorily or not. But there's been conversation today certainly about each of the 5 priorities that you have. I am just wondering what you made of the answer that was provided by Katie Burkholder-Harris on the in response to my question at the outset about whether we need to have more hard actions written into the plan or whether it is best to leave it high level and nimble. I was really happy with the answer that I heard, that high level and nimble is good and they are working on the concrete actions that will be implemented through the annual work plans. But I'm just wondering whether that addressed your first point or not to your satisfaction.
I still don't know when the annual work plan is going to be, the first one is going to be developed. It's possible that we might get it this year, but probably not before the term of council wraps up and we're into election season. So I don't want this to become an election issue. I think everybody would agree that this is not going to help anybody. But leaving the annual planning till next term of council, essentially, to take it up means that there's going to be a long long wait where the system isn't going to be changing at all until we start making some changes to it. My concern, I think, is that working on annual basis doesn't provide enough time for the service providers to actually have predictability about their funding. And I don't think a 5 or a 10-year plan makes sense either. I agree with Katie there. 5 years, it makes more sense, but at least having a couple of years in ahead would make better sense for me. I suggested 3. I'd be willing to negotiate down to 2, but having an annual planning process just means that you're leaving people basically with 12 months to decide what they're going to do. That's too nimble. I think we need to be more forward-looking than that. I'd like to see some targets to be set on the 3 things that I think are the critical ones: the waiting time, how long it takes to get housed, how long they're staying housed, whether we're housing the most vulnerable or not. Those kinds of indicators should be possible to come up with as part of this plan. Maybe not for the full 10 years period, but it's certainly for the next couple of years.
Okay. And I'm sorry, Warren, what were those 3 key metrics?
How do we know we're housing the most vulnerable?
Yep.
How long is it taking to get them housed, and how long are they staying housed?
Sorry, bear with me.
But that's just off the top of my head. Personally, I'm not on the leadership table. I defer to their judgment about what they think are the 3 keys. I'm not trying to preach to the experts at all. They should set it. The city should set it, not me.
Okay, Warren, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for coming out today and presenting your views and for FCA, on behalf of FCA. Appreciate it. You're right in terms of the scale of preserving housing. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but Ottawa Community Housing purchased 311 units from Minto, for example, in 2024. This is the kind of thing that we need to do, and we need to do it on a large scale. There's other opportunities out there, especially with the market right now. It's soft, but it's soft for commercial developers, but it's an opportunity for nonprofit. I don't know if you'd agree with that. So this is an opportunity, an ideal time.
I couldn't see anywhere in the plan where it talked about preserving existing affordable housing. It seems to be a gap. That's why I mentioned it as one of the things that I think is missing from the plan.
That it did mention about repairing existing housing, like OCH has.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
repairing existing, but I mean, as far as the market housing that's currently affordable, what incentives are the city providing?
Yeah, no, I think that what OCH has done and plans to do again, if there's opportunities, is to make sure, because as has been stated many times about that 1-to-31 ratio of housing lost, there are opportunities, and we need to do it. This is not, like I said, an ideal time, and it has to be done at a large scale because it's very, very important. So, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate your points of view. Supportive housing, that is something that we need funding for. That is something that will help in terms of those with the greatest need in terms of complicated needs that are homeless and need help to be housed, because it's more than just having a roof over your head. So that is the key thing in terms of funding, and it has to be stable and long term. So I imagine you support that, and that's the direction we have to go.
But can the city actually commit to providing supportive support for the housing that they're building? It seems that we're dependent on senior levels of government.
We are.
That's something that needs that's an assumption that needs to be addressed.
It is, but we've made clear cases that it actually saves money, and I think that that's the important part. And we've gone to ministers. Believe me, we've gone directly to ministers to show the math that it actually saves money. And I know that the Alliance has pointed this out over and over again. So it's repeating that it's not a cost. It's actually a savings overall in terms of well, not just the human factor, but on the balance sheet, it's more affordable.
Take that as a question, if I may. I've just been reading about an initiative in Holland. I think it's translates roughly as barrier breaking, where municipalities set a format for breaking the rules in order to solve problems for individuals. It has to be signed off, of course, by the senior managers, but they make a case. They show the legitimacy of the case. They show the costs of not breaking the rule and compare it with the costs of breaking the rule, and document that so that they've got their backside covered, I guess, so that the individual cases that don't fit the rules can be dealt with more humanely. It's possible to take that approach and allow staff to be more creative.
Okay, well, there's good examples everywhere, and we need to look at them all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. I originally had my hand up a little bit to speak to what Councillor Kavanagh just mentioned with respect to Ottawa Community Housing. I'm also on the board with the chair there, with chair of the OCH. But yeah, just to mention, OCH does have that role as City's Municipal Housing Corporation to be able to do those large scale acquisitions. I'm certainly hopeful that with the federal government's federal rental protection fund, we're all waiting to hear news on that we'll be able to continue to scale that capacity. One thing you mentioned is that I believe that I understood correctly when you were doing your presentation, was that you mentioned that the city isn't housing people. Did I hear that correctly?
I don't remember saying that.
Oh, okay. I was concerned when you were talking about all the different factors and that we weren't I thought that you had said that we weren't housing people, and I just wanted to mention that you are absolutely correct in terms of all the factors that you presented on your slide there with all the challenges we're having. But we did house over 1,000 households last year, and it is very difficult with all the factors that I know you're well aware of. The crisis is in mental health, addiction, homelessness. I'll add another crisis, the crisis in provincial funding, which is one of the biggest crises contributing to this situation. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that you knew we are city staff are working pretty hard with the sector members on trying to get people housed.
I think perhaps I was quoting the housing needs assessment, which said that we're not housing people as fast as they're losing homes.
Yeah, and absolutely that's true. Yeah, 100%. But thank you very much, Warren, for coming out today.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you, Warren, for being here and for your patience. We are now moving to questions to staff. And I see that Councillor Gower has a question for you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks very much, staff, for the presentation. Thanks to everyone who was involved in the development of this plan. I remember in 2020 when it was a council debate as to whether or not we actually had an emergency when it comes to homelessness. And wow, have we ever come a long way. And I think there's total alignment around the council table that this is a top priority for our city. I wanted to hone in on three things. One is the new definition of affordability. And I really like the definition you've come up with, and I understand why you've done that. Can you talk to me about how, does it align with our official plan or with the provincial policy statement? Does it matter whether it does or not, or how does it or doesn't align, and what are the implications if it might be different?
Thank you, Chair. So maybe I can start, and if my colleagues want to add to that. I think one of the ongoing challenges is because housing is a three-level of government issue, that these definitions, even among programs within a particular level of government, for example, the province, health does not line up their definitions with the housing side of things for the same type of thing. So I think what the exercise we undertook as staff over a year and a half to develop these definitions was to establish it clear when we're talking about our 10-year plan, reporting on progress, that we're amalgamating our definitions of affordable housing under this when we talk about it to the community. So I would say, simply said, it doesn't necessarily matter if this definition aligns with other provincial and federal funding programs. We're still going to have to report on those definitions, but in terms of making it more accessible and understandable consistency at the community level, these will be the definitions we're using. So I think we can have both, but it's about where and how we promote to provide some consistency across the board there.
Do you see any advantage or a need to updating some of our other policy, like the official plan, to better match what you're proposing in this 10-year plan?
Thank you, Chair. So I don't see necessarily a need to embark on that right away. One of the things that we did plan to do through that definition update is that we would periodically review. So as we kind of move through, this was quite a long process to get to where we are. We could review again. I think the key part for us is just making sure that we're being clear when we report back that if there is a definition, that we recognize that, and then also reframe that within the city's definitions, here's where it could fall. So a lot of it is simply comes down to a math exercise of transferring over a housing-based or AMR, average market rent-based argument into an income decile level. So it is possible to do and essentially translate our financial or affordability levels into various languages.
Okay. So on that again, one other issue I want to make sure I understand is the affordable rent, let's say, is going down, I would think, in almost all circumstances. So what 1,500 might have been affordable, now it's going to be 1,000. Does that have implications for a nonprofit housing provider? If they have to achieve a lower rent, will that mean they'll need additional subsidies to make their pro formas work on construction? Or like what are the implications financially on our nonprofit partners?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, that is something we need to look into. So I work very closely with Lily in the strategic initiative departments. Our capital funding frameworks change quite often, and so do our operating side. So to your point, yes, we need to look at how do we pair operating subsidies or rent supplements with the capital programs that are coming through, because again, those change. And it's something we do regularly evaluate as the capital programs change. Some of them provide more capital up front, some of them don't. And it really comes back to some of my operating funding working with Lily and the team is where can we put that to be most effective, essentially make our dollars go the furthest from the operating side.
So is that something that'll be phased in gradually over a number of years if there's different requirements?
Thank you, Chair. I think these, they're not phased in. It really comes in with each new funding program that we have to look at. So each time there's a new funding announcement, we have to relook at the whole framework each time.
Okay, I think it's something we're going to have to watch and see how you're adapting to that with the changing definitions. I'm still a little concerned about what that does for overall funding needs operationally and capital as well.
Councillor, I just want to be helpful and by adding a piece of additional information. We're also doing another research project related to the municipal housing facility, and we look at applying the 6 decile household income and comparing that into the average market rent. And that work is to be reported to committees and the council in April. And our preliminary findings suggest that the 6 decile of the household income would be equating to approximately 120% of the today's average market rent. So as a matter of the fact, applying the new definition would result in a higher affordable rent, not a lower affordable rent.
Okay, interesting. So that's coming in April. Okay. Second topic was on the goal 1.1B on mergers and acquisitions. We spent a lot of time on acquisitions, but on mergers, where do you see the city helping or having a role to facilitate mergers?
Thank you, Chair. So one of the things we do as a city, these are all private entities, nonprofits that we work with, so we don't direct the work. This really comes back to that community-led approach with the Housing Homelessness Leadership Table is how do we provide opportunities and education around what acquisitions and mergers can mean. So more of what the city's role is a facilitator for those kind of discussions, supporting from the operating agreement side, tying into, you know, provincial permissions that we may need. We as a service manager are one removed for any direct conversations on directing mergers and acquisitions. We are there again to facilitate the discussion, kind of move through the brainstorm. As you heard Mike mention in his delegation, a key part of what we've been doing as well as the city is working with our community housing providers who have an interest in this, kind of facilitating is what does it look for the city side. So I'd say as staff, we're more a seat at the table than the lead on initiatives like that.
Okay, thank you. And then the third, it's more of a comment. Just I was glad to see in the plan a real emphasis on OCH. I think it recognizes that OCH is our municipal housing corporation, and they have an excellent track record over recent years of being able to build at scale and at speed and with efficiency. And over the next 5 years, over the next 10 years, I think council is going to have to make sure we are supporting OCH and others, but OCH primarily because it is our chief partner in making sure the funding is there, making sure the policy is there, making sure the focus and the alignment and the collaboration is there with OCH and the city and other partners, because they are going to be key to us reaching the goals that are within this plan, whether it's new builds, whether it's acquisition, whether it's supporting other nonprofit sector entities. They're going to be a crucial partner, and I hope council will continue to strongly support them. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Kale and Clara and the whole team for this strong plan. This has been a lot of work and appreciate it. And I appreciate particularly the collaboration with OCH and the Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table. And as you know, OCH has been an active contributor. As chair of OCH, I want to express appreciation to staff and the OCH team for the significant accomplishments to date, many of which were highlighted in this report and show real progress towards our shared goals. Looking ahead, this report makes clear that OCH is a key delivery partner in achieving the outcome of the 10-year housing and homelessness plan, especially when it comes to scaling affordable and community housing. And it's all in progress. I want to emphasize the importance of continuing to leverage the capacity we already have, which Clara has highlighted in her presentation. When our goal is to house more people, OCH stands ready with proven ability to work closely with the broader nonprofit and supportive housing markets or sectors, to deliver what our city needs. Initiatives like Bumblebee show how OCH and supportive housing partners can work together to create more supportive housing. And it's great to see this working continually with strong support from the city's housing and homelessness team. Strengthening these collaborations helps mature our housing sector and positions. As we move ahead, it's important that we continue to strengthen and streamline the processes that are critical for moving fast and scaling up the supply of community housing. This 10-year plan clearly reflects that OCHC's role is central to the city's ability to meet its housing development goals and targets set over the next decade. By having the city fully leverage OCH as the primary delivery partner, we enable OCH and the broader nonprofit sector to work together even more effectively. And this position council and city to improve the long-term housing affordability and deliver it right. So I want to thank you very much for all that has been going on. And I encourage everyone to attend the upcoming Health and Housing Symposium, which will take it to the next level to talk about how housing and health need to be together, and that's on April 10th at 9:30. So I'm just going to put out a shout out for that because I think that's the next step. So I just wanted to do that plug. And I know that we'll have some great speakers, including the mayor and Councillor Kitts as chair of public health. So anyway, that's not a question at all. That's just to give you the information that our working together has been very effective. I will put in a plug with my other hat on for affordable housing for older adults. I know that's something that I'm missing a meeting right now with Aging in Place and the mayor's office who want to talk about that. So I might as well take this opportunity to ask that question. And it's been listed, and it's a growing concern because it's a growing demographic. And I just wanted to get a response since on that specifically. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of what we're doing for older adult housing, if you look at the last 10-year plan, we did have a focus in on older adult housing, and we want to continue that work. We very closely work together with the team that developed our older adult plan when we were doing the 10-year housing and homelessness plan, taking a lot of the housing feedback into that. What I think older adults need to see is now that we've had this great framework is what's actually in the details on those year-to-year work plans. So one of the things Housing and Homelessness Leadership Table has been discussing is once the plan is officially passed, going back up to some of those critical tables who have reached out, be it youth, older adults, the DSO sector, and having those in-depth discussions about how do we carve off some of that important housing and making sure that we have targets set under that equity and inclusion framework that we had set. And then also making sure that in addition to that, we've really called that out in the long-range financial plan once we get to that in the next term of council.
Thank you, appreciate it. I realize there's a lot of importance in the equity and inclusion, but I'm just focusing on that because it's growing and people are staying in housing longer. That's the reality, and that means that we'll need more and more. Sometimes people are there for 40 years in a senior building. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Troster.
Hi. First of all, thank you to staff and to the entire Housing and Homelessness Table for working on this plan. There's a lot of really important stuff there. I too was very excited by this new definition of affordability. My staff was like, Councillor, there's a really good definition you need to read. And it's great. My question, though, is from the perspective of the user, of the person who needs housing, of the person who's on a wait list, how will the change in this definition affect their experience, their eligibility, or the benefits that they receive? Or will it?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the current programs, it won't have any immediate impact, but one of the things we're going to be going through once this is officially passed through council is essentially a consistency review within our programs, be it housing benefits or rent geared income, which is set by the province. I think one of the ongoing challenges is that we have some purview as the municipality to set how affordability definitions affect access to our programs, but in a lot of other areas we don't. So I think, again, it's going back and clearly defining for municipal programs and aligned to these proper, the official definitions, and then making sure that we describe those provincial or federal programs as it relates to our municipal definitions. So again, there's some clear consistency of what income threshold would I be at to be able to access what types of housing support programs.
Okay, thank you. I took a flip back to the plan that this would be replacing, and I asked a similar question to Katie about chronic homelessness. The stated goal in the 2020 to 2030 plan was to reduce chronic homelessness by 100%. Where are we on that goal, and what is the goal moving forward? Because I understand the picture has shifted, the situation has gotten worse, we have tremendous inflow from other communities, but do we have concrete targets on chronic homelessness right now in this new plan, and how are we going to implement them?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So we do have chronic homelessness targets. I'll say a lot of that is set currently by our funding formulas for the province and federal government. They require us to set minimum, which I believe is federally currently 25%, and the province is 40%. Don't quote me on that, but it is targets set by them. And unfortunately, that's not ambitious enough. And we hear that a lot from the Housing Homelessness Leadership Table is we need to be setting higher targets for ourselves. Essentially, one of our major things we need to do in these annual work plans is set off how we're going to chunk out those really lofty goals of sending 100% of chronic homelessness into manageable yearly chunks. So that will be an ongoing discussion. But I will say the conversation around what we're doing for housing homelessness, chronic homelessness was well outlaid, and what our roadmap is through the housing needs assessment, what actually does say exactly what we need to do to get to a reduction scenario where we've come to a permanent end in 10 years.
So what, do we know what by which percentage we reduced chronic homelessness in the last 5 years? Do you have any sense of whether we made any progress?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of chronic homelessness, it has remained relatively steady in terms of length of stay. And as we've kind of heard from Warren's delegation, it is really due to that ongoing issue of inflow. I think one of the other things just for council to be aware of, we've actually started digging in more, working with Help Seeker, who is the group who did our report for the housing needs assessment, to dig more into the chronic homelessness numbers. What are the indicators and profiles of people who are getting stuck in the system? So I think that additional data we're working on them to get will be then shared with the Housing Homelessness Leadership Table, and essentially establishing a plan is where is the gaps in our current system for chronic homelessness.
Okay, great. I just don't want to see us continue to fail at this, right? Like these are the folks who have been in shelter for more than 6 months. They're often the people with really complex needs. And again, I keep pointing to the Auditor General's report on supportive housing, but this piece is particularly crucial in downtown neighborhoods. I have had situations, so just speaking for a moment about housing loss prevention. So I have had a number of cases in my ward where there were individuals who fell into rental arrears living in private housing for whatever reason. And in some cases, city staff were able to help them pay back that arrears so they could maintain their housing. In other situations, they were told no. And a lot of the reasoning for that was pretty murky. There were privacy concerns. It was very difficult for staff to explain to me why person A was able to get their arrears paid and person B couldn't. And it seemed fundamentally unfair to me, to be completely honest. There are other cities like Toronto, they have something like a rent bank where there's a very clear process you can apply to if you need rental relief. I'm wondering if that's something that is being contemplated or that you might contemplate within the context of this plan, because I think having really clear criteria, I think people understanding what funds are available to them and really having a forward-facing strategy on housing loss prevention could be really beneficial to the city, and it's something I might consider pursuing. I'm just interested in getting your thoughts.
Thank you, Chair. And just for context, so our arrears payment is funded through my team, the Housing and Homelessness Services team. That funding is then provided subsequently to Employment and Social Services, who provides this funding through a provision of benefits. So on the staff's end, it is a very clearly defined benefit and calculation of when do we provide these benefits, to what amount. It is tied back to housing affordability. For example, they have thresholds that they need to make a determination of whether this housing will be affordable on an ongoing basis. However, it is also limited in terms of eligibility for those programs. Like, you have to be on Ontario Works, have a certain asset limit threshold. So there's a lot of, to your point, I think, nuance in what constitutes the ability to fund some of those programs. I will say some of the ways we've looked, especially in this private market example, we've looked to fill the gaps through other programs like our bridge housing program, where if you don't fit into a narrow eligibility criteria, sometimes which is set by the province, we have the ability to come in with more municipal-based programs, provide that additional flexibility. The other thing I think we need to have a discussion on with the Housing Homelessness Leadership Table, to your point, is how do we leverage our housing benefits? We've heard it from another people at the table, to focus more on prevention instead of waiting for people to come to the shelter to implement the obvious solution.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, speaking to what Katie said, that our system right now incentivizes becoming homeless. So again, I've had situations where people have said, my landlord is willing to keep me on. I just need help paying back the arrears. And they were told, we can't pay back the arrears, but we can help you with first and last month's rent on a fictional other apartment that they couldn't afford. So they ended up becoming homeless. So I'd really like to see us avoid that situation, because those are cases where people really don't need to be falling into homelessness. And if a small amount of money is the solution, I think we should be putting that forward. On that same track, I know that there have been cuts to the Canada Ontario Housing Benefit, which means that we're only able to offer co-op to people who are actively homeless, correct?
That's correct.
So, and then you spoke about the city subsidies. So what's the plan going forward, given the cutbacks to COB, to ensure that we can have that bridge funding to keep people housed?
Thank you, Chair. So the situation with Canada and Ontario housing benefits, so the city anticipates to receive one more final allocation going to the end of the national housing strategy. Council has currently approved a maximum funding ceiling for municipal programs, which was 7.1 million. So as we approach that, we are looking at other strategies. We are not unique in Ontario, so we are in conversations with other large municipalities, Toronto, Peel, and York, about what does it look like in multiple different scenarios of how they may redo these housing benefits programs. I think the other thing that we know we need to be working on as well, and this has been a conversation at the Housing Homelessness Leadership Table, is how do we use these benefits, especially on the municipal side? Can we create different ones within that same funding bracket that are maybe time limited? Like, I think we need to be innovative using the funds we have. To be clear, I know the city does not have the ongoing tax levers to be able to expand programs at the scale and scope of a federal provincial partnership. So we need to keep pressing advocacy there, but also do an internal review of, are we filling the critical gaps or using our municipal benefit funding the best we can?
Thank you, and sign me up for any advocacy with the province on that, because it's so important. Final question. I know you mentioned as one of the accomplishments that we purchased the Kilbourne site in 2023. What is the plan to rapidly develop that? Like, I understand there's been a concept plan developed. I'm just wondering if you can get an update. That is a really important piece of city land. Has a real potential for services, for support that are just a little bit outside the core, which helps spread things out. Access to transit. Like, I keep telling my residents, it's coming, it's coming. There's going to be stuff there, and right now there isn't.
So through the chair, staff are working on the Kilbourne site. We just finished a request for proposal process and selected the successful candidate. I have to double check my team whether this could be announced publicly, but we made a decision. So the next step is to work with a partnership team, work out a concept plan. The vision for the site includes affordable housing, supportive housing, community supported services, a health hub, which is a highlight for the redevelopment. And we'll keep council updated, hopefully near the end of the year.
That's great. Yeah, anything we can do to help you accelerate would be great. I think it's an exciting opportunity. And just to let you know, I've had community service providers reach out to me who are looking for space, who are really eyeing that site and really hoping that they can expand into that site. And I think it would be good for downtown ultimately to have drop-in services, support services, low barrier services at that location, because it is close to the core, but it helps spread things out in a way that I think could be really positive for the downtown. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Chair Leeper.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm walking out of today's meeting actually fairly excited, optimistic, hopeful. I think what I've heard today is, compared to say 5 years ago when we first did the plan, was the integration, the coordination, the collaboration between the various different parts of the puzzle. So, you know, we're seeing under the particular leadership of the Alliance to End Homelessness, the housing sector working together in a way that I think is different than it was 5 years ago. The collaborative, you really feel it today. The collaboration between the city and the sector is really encouraging as well. So really hopefully this was a very pragmatic discussion that we've had this morning, and I'm looking forward to seeing that spirit of pragmatism continue over the course of the second 5 years of this current 10-year plan. There are a lot of opportunities. I was just listening to Councillor Troster talk about the opportunity for drop-in at Billings on Bank. I remember the Tom Brown when we had respite care there and we had these integrated services that were very successful at housing people. And I wish that we were continuing forward with that. The provincial funding ended, of course, for that. I'm hearing about opportunities for acquisition, opportunities to increase community development, opportunities to invest further in transitional housing, opportunities to set up a proper rent bank, opportunities to extend the housing benefit. What I'm really interested in is, as we politicians get excited about some of these opportunities, how is that going to work with the priority setting exercise, the annual work plan exercise that the HHLT and the HHLT is going to be doing? How do we work best as politicians with the bureaucracy so that we're not bombarding you with every idea that we have, and that you're able to pursue something that is strategic and thoughtful and that will bear fruit?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, other Chair. I'll add. It's a really good point, and I think one of the things, I'm glad you recognize the work that's put in, and a huge credit to Katie starting this work even before I was involved. I think what we want to create as a sector and as a system, even I'll say sector adjacent to housing, like the health sector, is that we all know what the city's plan and embed that is. I would say we actually do want to hear all of councillors' ideas, all the community ideas, because we have not yet found the magic solution that solves everything, nor is any other community in Canada. So we do need that ongoing community feedback to tweak those work plans, to tweak the direction we're going. You as councillors have your ears to the ground the most of anyone in the community in terms of what are the needs of your residents. So we need to hear that. What I would encourage councillors to do is reach out to Katie and myself. We can be your conduit into that housing and homelessness leadership table. And also, I think a huge part of the role council can play is linking us with the partners in your community that may have a touch point, may have an idea, may have a way to support, maybe have a way we can support, and bring those to us. Because I think what we need to do now that we have the housing and homelessness leadership table is kind of expand that layer out where it's more clear across the broad spectrum of community partners that have touch points with our sector, so that everyone knows that no wrong door approach, no wrong place to put an idea approach, but it's all getting back to that coordinating table.
I worry a bit when the plans are being created on a yearly basis about the potential for us to derail or distract some of the work that you're doing. But I also want to make sure that I'm recognizing that council has an important role to play in terms of setting what the priorities are. And I'll be watching really carefully, I think, to see how that evolves over the course of this new approach. Warren had asked with the FCA when that first work plan will be developed and then finalized. Is that dovetailing with the 2027 budget, or how does that work?
Thank you, Chair. So currently we're targeting when we have council reestablishes the official rollout of the plan. That said, as Katie had mentioned, we are all well underway with some of those initiatives I had mentioned of where the key areas of focus is. I'll be clear too that there's two components. There's the thing that are going to be really powerful, the housing homelessness leadership table to lead. Most of what I showed on the screen in terms of solving youth homelessness, coordinating our family sector, are things that are going to be community driven, very public. So that plan will be developed relatively shortly. We're developing a youth homelessness plan. There's also a whole section of this that are going to be more of your city staff elements of the plan. It's delivering on like a municipal property tax report and those kind of things. So there is going to be a conversation we're going to be having at the housing and homelessness leadership table is how do we make sure that we're all rowing in the right direction, but not stepping on toes or slowing the work down. We know we need to move as quickly as possible. So I think that's still something we're working to establish. In terms of the official plan, it'll be Q1 2027 when we're coming out with that, but it'll essentially include year one plus year two in terms of future looking, because we'll be most of the way through year one.
I can't even imagine how important that first quarter of 2027 is going to be. And of course, you'll have new politicians around this table. It's going to be a sensitive and challenging time, I think. So we'll watch carefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair Leeper. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd also like to thank staff for all the hard work that they've undertaken on this plan. The consultation, not just with us, but with the sector, I think has been very important. We've seen that staff is willing to embrace the innovations and be responsive to the sector. And I think that's very important with the establishment of the leadership table. And I think we're also seeing different movements in terms of affordability definitions that are very important. And I really applaud the shift to an income-based definition of housing affordability in this plan. I think the approach towards co-governance is really important because what we saw this morning, I think, was very impressive. That we're listening to people with lived experience, and we're ensuring that that is part of the co-generation of the different services and solutions that will move forward. So I think that's very important. And I'd also echo some of the comments of my colleagues around the focus on Ottawa community housing, and I'd like to commend the chair as well as the board of that organization in terms of the work that they're doing. I'm seeing that very actively in my community. I get reports about the maintenance that's being undertaken in terms of the assets there, as well as the work on new developments that my ward has been a beneficiary of in Wateridge Village with the Mikinak community. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of work that's being undertaken and a focus as well on equity and vulnerable populations that I saw in this report. So I'd like to ask some questions regarding that. The plan commits to disaggregating data by equity denied groups wherever possible and to developing specific equity actions through work plans. I'm just wondering if staff can provide a timeline for when these targets will be in place, what data gaps currently prevent disaggregation, and what is the plan to close them. So in other words, when will specific measurable targets for equity denied populations be established, and how will progress be tracked within the scope of the plan?
Thank you, Chair. So the work has already started on that. A big piece of what we're doing is you have in the 10-year plan a lot of language around we want to see this go up, we want to see that go down. But a lot of the work you don't see in what was presented to council is I'll say the sub-disaggregated measures we know we need to want to do. So the HHLT has already had extensive amounts of conversation on this of what we need. Now, I think the gap that you're going to see us develop as part of the work plan is how we gain that additional data. And I think what's really important is that from the city staff side of things, we will also be tying this back to our community and social services data strategy, which looks much more broadly than just what we're doing as housing and homelessness services. We know it ties into what employment and social services does, kind of across the social services board. So at the city side, it will be aggregated there. But I think there was also a very important recognition from the city side of things that we don't fund the entire housing and homelessness system as staff. So a big part of the work is going to be, we may have developed our great ideas as a housing homelessness leadership table, which is largely representative of city funded programs. But there's a second layer we need to go down into the community to do some more consultation is, does this meet the need? Do our housing or housing adjacent partners have this data? Because what we're realizing again is that the housing and homelessness system is very complex. To have comprehensive data that's really giving a true sense of what's happening in the community requires more than just city funded programs being involved in that. So again, the work started, but I think the long-term vision is establishing clear goals and priority in that first work plan I just mentioned of how we're going to get from A to B. And I think, again, it's establishing targets of in 5 years, this is the type of data we're going to have across the system and sector.
That's very important. I hear that across the board from different social service agencies to concerned residents in the community about being able to measure properly in order to deliver the proper services that are required. So I'm pleased to hear that. I I'm definitely aware that that work is advancing, and I'm also very pleased to hear that that work will be coordinated with other work throughout the city. I think that's very important. The 2024 PIT count shows 19% of people experiencing homelessness identified as Indigenous, and racialized households are also overrepresented in housing instability. I'm just wondering if you could speak to specific initiatives in the initial work plan that will target these populations and how outcomes will be measured.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with the Indigenous plan because really that's focused around the housing and homelessness table. If you're unaware, we have 2 sitting members from the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition that sit at that table. The role of the city and us as a community is supporting our Indigenous partners in delivering on that work plan. So in terms of what are we doing? Right now it's focused on the Inuit VAW shelter, but there's a number of capital initiatives, things like that they want to be taking on. Family Healing Lodge, I mentioned the Aging Out initiatives. We want to maintain that continued effort to make things Indigenous led. The other thing we've been working on for several years now is continuing work on Indigenous data sovereignty. We're also looking to engage more with host nations in terms of big picture questions around the plan. So I'll say the work is ongoing, and I would also say in terms of targets and where we're going, we're not throwing out some of the key initiatives targets that we had in our last 10-year plan necessarily. We are going to refine what those targets are, but as you saw in the last plan, and I imagine this will be the same this plan, is we are going to be establishing those clear targets based on those guiding principles that we've set in the plan. That's something that comes up over and over. In terms of the overrepresentation of racialized data, I think one of the things is we don't even have a good way to measure that right now across our housing and homelessness data systems. It's not something that we've been collecting. So I know Katie would be happy to hear me say this. This is the first thing we need to do is have good data to make good decisions. So we're starting, I'll say, further back than having a full Indigenous plan. But the first thing to do is data, and we've actually started developing additional partnerships to figure out where can we get this data, other sources of data, as I'd kind of mentioned. It's growing out from community members that may have some of this, a place to start from to establish that baseline, which will be in those work plans.
Yeah, once again, I really commend staff on that approach. I know that social service agencies have reached out to both myself and my office to take part in that process because they obviously want access to quality data as well, so that they in turn can also make decisions. So, I think we saw some code generation in terms of developing this plan. I think that there will be a wider interest in code generation in a sense around the research that informs actions, not just on the housing and homelessness file, but across the board. My last question really focuses on the status of the leadership table's commitment to developing its own equity, diversity, and inclusion framework. Do we know what the timeline is to develop that framework, and who will be consulted in its development?
Thank you, Chair. So there's actually a subcommittee or a working group subcommittee established with the Housing Homelessness Leadership Table to take on that work. I don't have a great degree of detail to share at this time, but it is ongoing work that we actually started in December. So I can get back to you with further details once that group has kind of established how that will work.
Well, thank you so much, and I do really appreciate the focus of this plan, especially around equity, diversity, inclusion, and working with our partners, working to enhance data. I think that's very important, and I also appreciate the fact that there is work on ending youth homelessness by 2030. I think the devil will be in the details in terms of what that looks like in terms of measurements, and I know that my colleagues will be asking questions about that, but I think that we are definitely heading in the right direction in terms of engagement with the community and on data. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Curry.
Thank you. And honestly, to pick right up from there, you remember 5 years ago how many of us sat here and we debated for hours on inclusionary zoning, and it was like a battle for hours at Planning Committee, as you'll recall. We've come so far in 5 years, it's actually shocking. And you think about the delegations we had then, and people were furious, and there was so little
well, it seemed like there was such a, not really a clear plan, and this is so reflective of the fact that there was a plan, and you've enacted the plan. So thank you very much. I know many of my colleagues have said the same thing, but I think we've come really, really far, and I can't imagine how much work it's been in your departments. So thank you very much on behalf of all of us and all the people that are at that leadership table. It does take a lot of people to figure out what the best way to do things is. My question just in general of the next 5 years. So, and in the report, it just says in the next term of council, we'll have another review, because really the next 5 years is the 5 years that would be 10 years. So can you just explain exactly what the schedule is for the review? And then would we actually start a full another 10 years? Is it always rolling? Just so that I'm clear on that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's correct. It's established by the province. Each year you have to have a 10-year plan, but it's renewed every 5 years. So that process, I forget what the date was in the report, but yeah, we start that process about a year and a half before the next 10-year plan is due, just from the amount of engagement, consultation that it takes to do that. And then in terms of the legislative process, we are required to provide a draft 10-year housing and homelessness plan to the province, essentially 90 days ahead of us being approved at council. So that's the established timeline the province is expecting of us. And beyond that, we kind of have some flexibility.
Okay, so there is some flexibility. Okay. Thank you for that. So just to be somewhat parochial, you know, we have in Canada, and really in only one area of Canada, North, we have an OCH building, and like, so appreciative that that's all we have. We have 40 one-bedroom units. That's all we have. And there's a huge demand specifically for seniors. And that really, I mean, I know OCH is doing a great job with getting more supportive housing in every single building, but it really isn't fully supportive housing at the Penfield Drive location. There's a spot to build another one. What in this plan would see a focus on the suburbs and trying to get some affordable and supportive housing, like more than the 40 that we have?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So in this plan, it sets the vision, and as Kale had mentioned previously, what we do next is really going to look at each of the programs and develop the strategies in terms of implementation, and having conversations with partners in the affordable housing sector and the homeless sector to really look at those kinds of questions. So as an example, Action Ottawa is the program that gives us the authority with regards to investing capital in new development of affordable and supportive housing. To align with this new 10-year housing and homeless plan, we're beginning engagement with the sector the latter half of this year, with an intention to bring back a revised Action Ottawa program and strategy that will look at like the full range of how we're going to execute on that new funding commitments in the second half of 2027. So that's where you'll see those kind of commitments really come to life. The current funding that we do have has been allocated through council already. And so we're really looking to the future in terms of how we support going forward.
Okay, so let me be very specific. So if there were an urban boundary extension anywhere in any suburb, like in whether it's Stittsville, Canada, Barrhaven, wherever it is, Orleans, would the city ever set aside specific housing for specific land for supportive housing, affordable housing? Is that anything that we will actually see?
So the chair, councillor, so the municipal land strategy, one of the important criteria is to look at the location of the available city-owned lands, and there is intention to allocate those projects and the lands at the different communities. So that's something we're committed to implement.
Would this be, just to follow up on that, would this be something that the specific councillor would be engaged in at the time?
Correct.
Okay, well, I would look forward to that, because, you know, we often think the suburbs don't need affordable, supportive housing, but they do. They really do. And as the numbers climb, you know, it will be everywhere that it's required. But there is, I would say, a dearth in the suburbs. The other thing is the portable housing benefit. Is that, I know we're getting a report on inclusionary zoning coming up, but is that our solution until the inclusionary zoning changes? from the province, not from the federal government, but from the province?
Thank you, Chair. No, those are kind of concurrent programs. So inclusionary zoning, although it can help affordability levels, they're essentially one's ongoing operating funding, a program that is established around income requirements. These go hand in hand of when we turn on these strategies, what the market conditions are that makes one of them more advantageous to the other, but they're not contingent on each other.
Okay, good. Okay, great. Well, again, thank you very much for all of this, and keep on going.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carr.
Yeah, thanks very much. Don't have much to say. Just that, I really appreciate all the work that's gone in, and I don't think that this report reflects actually how far we've actually come. And I say that as a Ottawa Community Housing Board member. The report there recognizes the OCH role in delivering scalability and long-term housing stability. And we know that a lot more is coming with OCH in terms of improved efficiency and smarter use of existing capacity. But I also say that as a community service committee member and council member, and also as a councillor who was elected after the housing and homelessness emergency was declared, and yet we had warehoused people in 2 community centres in my ward, and the equivalent of 2 community centre in Councillor's Plant ward. So when I look at where we were when I was elected and where we are now, it's incredible. And we know, and we heard from delegates today that we still have a crisis. We still have greater inflow than we have outflow. But that's what happens when you have the crises that we do. And I do have one question with respect to how you're working with the provincial government to, with respect to funding. How is that going with their role?
Chair, we continue to work with both the provincial and the federal government through conversations at the deputy minister level, the assistant deputy minister level, and we make the most progress when we work together with other municipalities that are facing the same kind of pressures that we are. So we are on provincial municipal tables, advancing a common voice around the pressures that municipalities are having in having to fill the gaps left by other levels of government. And so you've heard it today, you heard it from our delegates. If there's one key message, we must continue our pressure on other levels of government for housing benefits. One of the only ways that people are leaving homelessness is through the ability to afford housing in the private market. In addition to the other strategies in the plan, that is one key advocacy commitment, for instance, that we're having those discussions at those tables about.
Yeah, thanks very much. And that's what we heard. We hear that time and time again, the need for those operating dollars in order to provide people with affordable housing. I read the recent Financial Accountability Office of Ontario's report, an update on subsidized housing programs in Ontario, and it's shocking to me to know that 16.8% of all households in Ontario, so that's over 1 million, about $1,045,000, require subsidized housing. And the provincial government is funding just over 300,000 of them, so 315,000 about. So they're 69.8% or 70% percentage of people who require subsidized housing are not receiving it. So the provincial government is only funding $2 billion a year when they need to fund $6 billion a year. And it's municipalities that are picking up these pieces. And we talk about all these crises. We talk about mental health crisis. We talk about addiction crisis. We talk about homeless and housing crisis. But the crisis is with the provincial government and their lack of funding. And I appreciate everything that you have done. I know how hard city staff are working to do the best that they can. So thank you very much for all your work that has gone into this.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Kitts.
Thanks very much, Chair. Like others, I just wanted to jump on to thank the team and the HHLT for the work. Despite the uphill battle we continue to face, I think there is a lot to be proud of in this plan. The updated definition, the co-designed plan, the new KPIs, the succinctness of the plan, which is very focused, that it's data-driven, and the ability to review this annually are all elements that I love. And I know we all hope that this new approach will bring meaningful change. I'm always weary when any of our plans have heavy reliance on other levels of government, but in this case, that is the proper approach. This is an all level of government challenge to tackle. And it is where we need to continue with our advocacy. So, for my part as chair of OPH, I will continue to fight for operating dollars for supportive housing. And I did want to highlight OPH's contributions to informing the plan. And like Councillor Kavanagh mentioned, I am really looking forward to the Health and Housing Symposium that's coming up next month on April 10th. It'll be a great opportunity to, again, bring leaders in the sector together to chart the next steps to improve the integration of health and housing systems across the city. So I'm looking forward to that. And again, just a thank you and a kudos for all your hard work.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Councillor/Chair Kitts. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. And two, I want to echo my appreciation for this report and all the good work and progress that's been made. It's not forgotten on anyone that this council declared a housing and homelessness emergency not too long ago. And we as a council and senior staff and all staff at the city have continued to keep housing and the homelessness crisis top priority in our decision making. $1 billion where I come from is a lot of money. And yet, and I appreciate the report lists how that $1 billion was allocated. And yet we've made, hopefully we can agree, a dent or a big dent in the larger problem. But when you really start to analyze what it cost to build one unit, let alone hundreds, if not thousands, the amount of money and resources that's still required. And to my colleague's point about that this is sort of all hands on deck challenge, that municipalities across this province cannot solve this on their own. They cannot afford to contribute the resources that are necessary without provincial and or federal government's help. Everyone has to be rowing in the same direction. So just a few questions. When you created the 10-year plan, when you refreshed the plan, you said it's a provincial requirement. Do you have to submit it to the provincial government? And if yes, do they provide feedback back? Do they, like, what do they say when they receive the report and have time to review it?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Yes, we are required to submit it 90 days ahead of it being presented to Council. Typically, the feedback is really around tying into provincial or federal programs, just general awareness. Where the province has the most interest is typically around the long-range financial plan, which also, especially in Ottawa, allocates certain contributions from federal and provincial government. So I'll say they're most interested when we get into that portion. And then their other feedback is really around aligning the language in the plan to be consistent with current operating and capital programs. So it's typically high level in terms of the direction they provide.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I just want to repeat a concern that I've had for some time, and that is organizations who receive money from the city to build housing, to expand housing, to embark on major capital repairs, who provide housing for people with high acuity, but do not have sufficient wraparound supports, social health supports for those residents, can cause challenges within the receiving communities where our new residents, our new neighbors are housed. And our city's housing department is well aware of this. It's things I've raised in the past, and I know it's been challenges in other neighborhoods as well. But housing plus insufficient supports does not equal success, long-term success. And we know that equation. And dollars for housing, very important. Dollars for the wraparound social and health supports is just as important. for that long-term success. So I just wanted to underscore that point again. And finally, I believe I've shared this with all members of council, but AMO has commissioned two very important papers within the last year, first coming out last year, entitled Ending Chronic Homelessness. It was a very detailed study that looked across Ontario. What are the regional differences contributing to homelessness? What are the root causes? It was recently refreshed in 2026. The projections do not look good, that without sufficient resources and attention to this matter from all levels of government, the challenges that we're seeing with the housing crisis will only get worse. So AMO's done some very good work in this regard. You need to be data-driven, evidence-based when you make decisions. And if you haven't read their papers, please do so. And finally, just a shout out to our staff again, particularly you, Mr. Brown. You have a challenging file on your hands in a challenging department. And your tenure, although it hasn't been too long, we've noticed, and you've made some, you've done some good work on this file. And I want to thank you for your leadership. It is challenging. You probably get bombarded from all directions on many times, but certainly the feedback from community groups in my ward, in addition to my work with you as well, has been very positive on a challenging file. So I wanted to publicly share that today. So thank you.
Kale, did you want to respond to that? No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Putting you on the spot. I would concur with that.
I'm blushing. Thank you. I really do appreciate the feedback, and I'll take this opportunity to turn into a question. Thank you, Mark. No, I do appreciate that, and I'll just say, in addition, I've talked a lot about the sector and us aligning, but we have also, as a sector, felt the support from council. So a big credit to folks around the table here about, like I was saying, bringing in those community partners, making sure that we as Ottawa are acting unitedly. So no, appreciate that feedback and hope to keep it up.
Wonderful. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you again to all that have been working on this plan. I think it's very interesting to see, the list of all the other documents that have to work in conjunction with this plan in order to make it a success. And certainly we've heard around this table already, the relationship between housing and poverty, or the relationship between housing and anti-racist work, and so on. So it is a complex file. And one thing that I was really looking for at the beginning of the term was a shifting risk tolerance from the city to move the needle on housing and homelessness. And I think we have seen that appetite. Of course, especially given some of the information that Councillor Carr just highlighted, we can't shift our risk to absorb the withdrawal of other levels of government when it comes to funding. But within the tools that we have, I have seen an appetite, including the co-design of this report and of this table. I mean, that is typically, understood to have a risk associated with it when you share power and influence with other organizations in a constellation design. But you've demonstrated your commitment here. And I must echo my peers, Mr. Brown, in my conversations with the sector, your leadership on this and your openness and your willingness to work together has been well noted. And so, kindness comes back to us. So this reciprocal relationship excites me greatly. Certainly something that as a houser myself, I'm pretty stoked for. So on that note, I would like to just have a couple answers for some pieces that I think I'd like to hear more about. So one of the things that I think is sort of a risk tolerant or a new risk appetite is the recent pilot that we announced in terms of debt financing for the Ottawa Community Housing Corporation. I think that's pretty exciting. That is a financial tool that we're using. We're creating a risk tolerance within the City of Ottawa. How do you imagine that information going into the plan over the next few years, and whether or not that could be further expanded to other providers?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So with regards to the OCH pilot, that is a great innovation. We're happy to see it come forward. We think that that can really unlock some additional housing and provide some more certainty for OCH at a period of time when we're still waiting to see how the federal government is really going to come to the table through Bill Canada Homes and also the provincial government. The intention really is to try it with OCH, but to explore opportunities and how we may be able to kind of mitigate any risk with expanding it to other providers so that other community housing providers do have the opportunity to leverage low-cost financing as well. So it is a piece to come, and it's built in terms of how we're looking at that particular pilot, where we're looking to take some lessons learned and see where it's successful, where we see some risks as we expand it, and then what are the mechanisms we can put in place that would support that. So that is work that the Affordable Housing team is actively undertaking along with our finance department.
Very good. And how are we advancing on the request for proposal process for nonprofit housing providers for pre-development funding and so on? I believe there is an intention in the coming months to perhaps create a preferred vendor list, for lack of a better term, for those actors that we know have a great deal of experience in building. Can you let us know how that is going with the team? I know the next request for proposal is imminent, so perhaps not for this round, but perhaps for next.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start and then invite my colleague Lily to add. So the city moved to or introduced a pipeline strategy in the past couple of years, and that was really around the time that the Housing Acceleration Fund was announced by the federal government. So the Housing Acceleration Fund it was a significant funding source for the city, and the municipality at that time, our council made a decision that the vast majority of the funds, so 90% of the funding from the federal government through that program, would be allocated to affordable housing, to support the new development of affordable housing. And at that time, what the city did under council's leadership and direction was really create this pipeline strategy and allocate 3 years worth of funding. And so that would provide more certainty to those proponents who are coming in through that process. The pipeline strategy is something that we continue to report on to council annually through when we come forward with the capital plan. And essentially, we have moved away from RFPs for small capital pots, and we've really been making use of this pipeline strategy to ensure that those projects are being completed and seek council's support for that approach. So every year we come forward, we say here are the projects that we're looking to fund in our pipeline, and then we allocate those funds to those projects that they're continuing to move forward. With regards to pre-development funding, there is an RFP that is being targeted for around the month of April. Pre-development funding we find is really important intake mechanism to build our pipeline, because this is the early stage of development, is when you have an idea and you're looking for the funding that's going to allow you to go from I have an idea to I have a vision to I have the plan to I'm making it happen. And so with pre-development funding, we do look for that as a key intake to our pipeline approach. Now, that said, I had mentioned earlier that our next step in terms of bringing to life the 10-year housing and homelessness plan is really to look at the programs and to undertake review of those programs. And so there is a review of the Action Ottawa program and all of the underlying programs that enable us to develop housing. And through that review, we will look at what is and engage with the sector around the best approach in terms of allocating the funds and bringing transparency to that process. We want to have an efficient process that is transparent and that gives some certainty to the affordable housing developers, including OCH.
Okay, very good. So what I'm hearing, from our delegations is that there is a coalescing of different organizations, operators, builders, a coalescing within the sector to try and create better efficiency, make capital move further, and sort of really examine their practices. And then I'm hearing from the city side, that we're also trying to open up new lines of financing or creative ways of advancing work faster through a different sort of risk tolerance, working with proven partners in maybe a different way. So that is all very exciting. I'm turning quickly to co-ops, Chair. So co-ops are, again, a very interesting group. We don't have a lot of representation necessarily directly from co-ops to this committee, which I wish we could hear more from Chasio and other actors that work in this sector and try and support our co-ops locally. I'm disappointed that we don't hear from them as often. But from our perspective at the city, what are we doing to support co-ops that are looking to take some action here? There's some willingness, I think, within some co-ops to do more, but tools at their disposal are not always available. I hear sometimes, that of course they have to raise housing charges, for example, to try and get a mortgage, to get off a lease and so on. Raising housing charges on some of their, tenants or neighbors might not be feasible for some folks, right? Because of the affordable housing lens. So how is the city working with these partners, and how are we negotiating, the responsibilities of other levels of government to try and unlock some of this potential?
Thank you, Chair. So I can start, and if my colleagues on the development side want to add anything. So in terms of what we do, the City of Ottawa is kind of unique that we have a significant number of federal co-ops, of which the city has no oversight role. To give you a sense, we have 19 providers who are co-ops in the City of Ottawa that we oversee, close to 1,500 units. Really what we do with a lot of these groups is through defined provincial funding formulas. So in terms of our ability as the service manager to oversee what they do internally, that is not necessarily our purview to direct work. We do work closely with Chasio, CHF, who have more of that direct support and oversight role, and they kind of provide governance support. Is quite broad in which they do for co-ops. We have to be careful as the City of Ottawa in terms of our role. We don't step in on behalf of housing providers. We adhere to the Housing Services Act and the standards co-op providers and other nonprofit providers are required to do under that. So in terms of the work we do, it's pretty limited in terms of that oversight support. That said, co-ops are an important part of our sector, and that model is an important part of our sector. So I think as part of the ongoing 10-year plan, where you see under objective 1.2 about being innovative, looking at alternate financing strategies. You heard from Mike about his ideas, and we're meeting with him shortly to hear more about that. I think there is certainly a role there to expand their sector, just like we need an expansion, I think, across sectors. But again, that's more of, I think we have to come up with what those innovative models look like over the next 5 years and start to implement and test some of them before we can get there. I don't have all the ideas right now, so just to speak to what we're limited to.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll just be very brief. First, I thought it would be a good opportunity to say thanks. We're moving ahead on Aerosmith, which is good news. Another part of the puzzle, senior Indigenous housing. I know Clara's smiling finally. It's been a long journey to get to this point, so something we're quite proud of. We're tearing down the old Gloucester Emergency Food Cupboard. It's going to be gone. They're moving into the mall now, so now we can build them a proper space to be able to keep our community living healthy and sustained in the future, and plus adding the Indigenous senior housing. I guess there's a few things, and I want to echo my colleague Riley Brockington with the AMO side of things. We have a provincial budget coming up. We're all fingers crossed that there's some nuggets in there for us. From the FCM perspective and the federal government perspective, obviously the Build Canada Homes Partnership, things that all come along with infrastructure, all these key factors that help us. And I do believe, I've heard the comments today, this term of council we're actually seeing some movement. I think in the past, maybe it was due to the federal government and their challenges on application processes and the trickle down even through the provinces. I guess the real simple question is, Are we seeing movement on the federal government side to be able to help with a lot of the things, especially from the application side of things? And I'm just taking this back to my colleagues across the country and to the federal government as well. Are we seeing the application process far easier to be able to apply for dollars, to be able to help with a lot of our projects?
Thank you, Chair. The federal government is undergoing significant change with regards to its funding programs. A number of them are sunsetting with the end of the National Housing Strategy, in particular the funding programs that existed for the affordable housing side of things. With regards to programs like mortgage loan insurance, so MLI Select, which is a key tool to support the market housing as well as the apartment loan construction programs, there have been reports of significant improvements. We're hearing from the folks who are working with them, so in the private sector in particular, that their application process has been improved overall. But that's in a context of a lot of shifts otherwise.
Yeah, so the ground is always moving, but it seems to be moving a lot quicker the last, I would say, year specifically, which is great news. I see some nodding, and I just want to applaud you guys for bobbing and weaving with how things are moving so quickly. But I think this is good news for the City of Ottawa. So thank you for your hard work.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Councillor. Seeing no further questions, we do have a motion before us, so I'll ask Councillor Perron to read in the motion.
Yes, and thank you to city staff who worked furiously in a Teams chat to get this off the ground. I really appreciate it. Whereas the city currently uses varying definitions of housing types, including shelter, transitional housing, supportive housing, social housing, student housing, private market housing across departments, and whereas inconsistencies between planning, zoning, land use, and service-based definitions create confusion in policy approvals and public understanding, therefore be it resolved that staff be directed to review an aligned definition of housing types across all relevant city departments, including planning and community and social services. Be it further resolved that staff report back with a harmonized framework and recommend updates to the relevant planning policies, bylaws, and program frameworks in alignment with the 10-year housing and homelessness strategy. Merci beaucoup.
Does anyone have any questions in regards to the motion? No, seeing none. Is that item carried? Carried. All right. So now we have the plan before us. Is there any? Is the plan carried as amended? I suppose. Is it carried? Carried. Thank you. That item's carried. Thank you so much, staff. I would like to say Marissa, Debbie, Lily, Kale, Clara, and all of your teams. Thank you for all the work you've put into this, as well as the many stakeholders in the community have donated their time, volunteered their time, and given their expertise to this effort. So thank you very much. The only item we have left is adjournment, folks. Are we adjourned? Is that item carried? Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.